There's a house on a lake in rural Wisconsin that's been sold 3 times in 10 years. Every time, the price drops. Every time, it's a young couple. And every time, it's the wife who starts having trouble sleeping. This story is called The House on Heron Lake. It was posted by Miss Snoot, a woman who lived in that house for 8 months. She made it out, but the woman before her didn't. If you find yourself scrolling real estate listings, and you find a lakeside home at a price that seems too good to be true, it is. Close the tab. For this story, I'm not going to use our real names, or the real name of the lake we were on. I'm a copywriter by trade, which means I spend all day making things sound polished and appealing, and I want to be upfront that I'm not doing that here. I'm not crafting this. I'm just telling you what happened to us between May and January at a house on a lake in rural Wisconsin, and I'm telling you because I don't know what else to do with it, and because someone just moved into that house, so they don't know what's in the water. My husband, Ethan, and I got married in April of the previous year. At the time, we were 28 and 29 years old, and we'd been dating since college. The wedding was small and perfect, and we were happy, just young and in love. We'd been living in a 1-bedroom in Milwaukee that cost more than it should have, so after the wedding, we started to look for something outside the city. Ethan had taken a job doing IT support for a company in a small town, about an hour northwest, and we had been talking for months about escaping from the city, getting some space, a place where I could work from home without hearing my neighbor's TV through the wall, and somewhere Ethan could fish on weekends without having to drive for 2 hours just to find water. The house showed up on a listing site in early May. A 3-bedroom on a lake with a dock, a big porch that faced the water. And the price was so far below what we'd budgeted that I actually triple-checked whether the listing was a scam. It wasn't. It was a real house. The price was real too. Our realtor said the previous owners had relocated and were motivated to sell. I asked why they'd left. She said they'd moved out of state for work, and that answer was good enough for me. I didn't push it. I wasn't going to be picky about this situation. The house had a porch and a dock and a lake view, and it cost less than our current rent. Well, you better believe I wanted it badly enough to not ask any questions. I didn't want to complicate it. We moved into the place in May, and for 4 months, it was everything we'd hoped it to be. But what happened there, we never saw coming. The house was beautiful and the lake was gorgeous. Our life there was the happiest we'd ever been. The lake was the thing we loved the most. Mid-sized, you could see the far shore, maybe a 1/4 mile across, ringed by trees and a handful of other houses spread wide apart. The water was spring-fed and clear in the shallows. You could see the sandy bottom for the first 15 feet, or 20 feet even, before it dropped off into the deeper green, then into a dark that you couldn't see through. I swam in it almost every day that summer. Ethan fished off the dock in the evenings. We had a bottle of wine on the porch most nights and watched the sun go down over the water. Meanwhile, our cats would sit in the windows, watching the lake like it was their very own personal nature documentary. The cats were named Poppy and Noodle. Poppy was a calico we'd adopted from a shelter during college, nervous and skittish and deeply opinionated about everything. Noodle was a big orange tabby who was afraid of nothing and had once fallen asleep on top of a running vacuum cleaner. I loved them both, but Poppy was my cat, the one who slept on my chest and followed me from room to room, purring so loudly you could hear her through a closed door. We met the neighbor across the lake about a week after we moved in. His name was Dearth. I'm sorry if I'm not spelling that right, I've never heard a name like it. But he was in his 70s, and he had lived on the lake for most of his life. He came over with a jar of homemade pickles. Dearth was friendly, though a bit stoic. I noticed a lot of older rural men in Wisconsin are that way. He would talk to us about weather and fishing, but he always avoided anything personal, unless you fought him on it. He told us about the lake. He was the one that taught us it was spring-fed and very deep in the center. He said there were spots where the bottom dropped to 80 or 90 feet, allegedly, though nobody had ever measured it properly. And he said it never fully froze in the winter. Something about the springs keeping the water circulating. He said something along the lines of, "Gets a shelf of ice around the edges, but the middle stays open, black water all winter." He said it matter-of-factly. I noticed that in the weeks since we'd moved in, I'd never seen Dearth on his dock. In fact, I never saw him near the water at all. The lake was beautiful during the day, but as time went on, it became more difficult to look at after dark. I don't mean spooky, but it was like the water after sunset went flat and black, and it wasn't so easy on the eyes. At those times, there wasn't much reflection or movement. The texture was just gone. It looked less like water and more like a void, like a big dark hole in the landscape in the shape of a lake, and what was underneath became nothing at all. I made this observation out loud to Ethan once. He said I was being overdramatic. I laughed and agreed because it did sound silly, at least for now. I swam in the lake for the first time on our third day in the house. It was warm enough that the air had a haze to it, but the water was still holding on to spring. Ethan was on the porch with a box of kitchen stuff he'd been unpacking for an hour, without making visible progress. I walked down to the dock in my swimsuit and stood at the end looking down at the water, which was clear enough that I could see the sandy bottom 8 feet below. There were pebbles and the shadow of the dock posts, and a single bluegill hanging motionless in the shade. "You're stalling," Ethan called from the porch. "I'm preparing." "You've been preparing for 3 minutes, just get in." So I jumped in. The cold hit me like a truck. I swear my whole body seized for a moment. I came up gasping, and I heard Ethan laughing. I splashed some water in his general direction, which fell about 40 feet short, and he raised a coffee mug he was holding in a toast. I then swam out about 30 yards, past the point where I could touch the bottom. This was where the sandy shelf gave way to deeper green. The water was extraordinary once the shock wore off, all silky and mineral clean. I floated on my back and looked at the sky. Then I rolled over and looked down. The green below me was darkening, graduating through shades I could follow with my eyes until it reached a depth where the color simply ended and there was only darkness. The lake bottom was gone or unseeable. Below my kicking feet, I couldn't even tell how far the bottom truly was. And for a second, I felt it. An almost gravitational pull. The same lurch you might get at the edge of a cliff, except inverted, dragging downward. My stomach dropped. I kicked hard toward the shallows, and that feeling broke. By the time I reached the dock, I was breathing hard and laughing at myself. "How is it?" Ethan asked. "Freezing, but amazing. Get in." "Absolutely not." "You bought a house on a lake and you refused to swim in it?" "I bought a house with a porch. The lake is your department." Well, he did get in eventually, later that week, and he yelped loud enough that Poppy bolted from the window, hiding under the bathroom sink for about half an hour. We swam together most evenings after that, at least for a while. The water warmed up degree by degree until by midsummer it felt like nothing against your skin. The line between human body and lake dissolved. There was a night in late July that I keep coming back to. We'd eaten dinner on the porch, some pasta with whatever vegetables I'd managed to keep alive in the garden, which by that point was mostly zucchini, and we'd gone through most of a bottle of wine. The sun had been down for an hour. The sky was that deep late summer blue that refuses to go fully dark. Ethan wanted to go sit on the dock, and even though I told him I had just gotten comfortable, he pulled me up by both hands. and I complained the entire way until we were sitting at the end of the dock with our feet in the water. Ethan brought the wine bottle. The lake was warm and still. The far shore was a dark line of trees, and the other houses around the lake had their porch lights on, small, gold, and distant. It felt, at that moment, like we were the only real people in the world. The lights were just set dressing. We should have done this years ago, Ethan said. He meant the move, the lake, the house. We couldn't afford it years ago. We can barely afford it now, good deal that it was. And yet, I gestured at the lake. He clinked the bottle against my glass. Behind us on the dock, a small, determined shape was picking its way towards us, with the exaggerated caution of a creature who found the outdoors personally offensive. It was Poppy. She almost never came outside. She regarded anything beyond the front door as a vast, hostile conspiracy. But that night, she walked the full length of the dock, sat down directly behind me, and pressed her face into the back of my neck. Hard. The full skull headbutt that was her way of saying, "I've arrived, and you should now be grateful." I reached back and scratched under her chin. She started to purr, an absurdly loud purr that I felt rattling my collarbone. "She's jealous," Ethan said. "She's supervising," I replied. Poppy settled against my lower back, a warm, vibrating weight, and the three of us sat there at the end of the dock while the sky finished its slow fade to eventual blackness. Then the stars came out in their full glory, and the wine ran low. Ethan talked about a fishing spot one of his coworkers had mentioned. I listened partially. I felt something brush my foot under the water. A fish, probably, or a weed stirred by the current. So I pulled my feet up for a second, then put them back down and forgot about it. That was probably our happiest moment there, and I wish it had lasted. One morning late in the summer, I woke up, and I saw that the sliding glass door to the back porch was open. Just 6 inches, though. Maybe enough to let in the morning air, make the sound of the lake a little bit more clear. But there was a smell on the air, too. Something different. Ethan was already up, making some coffee, so I asked if he had opened it. He said no, and I reiterated that it was open. He said I'd probably forgotten to latch it before bed, and the wind had pushed it further open. I accepted this. The latch on that door was finicky. You had to lift and push it to get it to catch, and if you didn't do it firmly enough, it would drift open on its own. I told myself that's what happened. But I was pretty sure I remembered latching it. I recalled the sound of it clicking and the resistance and the door settling into the frame. I mean, I latched that door every night. It was a nightly ritual by then, and that door in particular was one that I focused on. But at the time, to be honest, I wasn't sure why that door demanded more of my attention. Anyway, I let it go, and I went on with my summer. Our summer. That peculiar smell became more noticeable at the start of fall. It was like this lake water smell, but concentrated and organic. Silty, low tide, like water that has rotting things in it, with a sweetness underneath that was closer to long fermented decay. Not at all pleasant. It was faint at the start. Just a whiff in the kitchen in the morning, gone before I could be sure I'd smelled it. Then stronger just a few days later, hanging in the hallway just outside the bedroom, like a pocket of bad air just wafted in. And it would get stronger still, settling into the back of the house near the sliding glass door, and no amount of cleaning could seemingly touch it. I went through the house with vinegar and baking soda, even bleach. At one point I tried this enzymatic cleaner. Sometimes the smell would retreat for a few hours, but it would come back, as if something was making it seep through our floors. Ethan smelled it sometimes too. He said something that sounded like nothing at first, but I actually looked it up, and it's a real thing. He called it the lake turning over, fall turnover, a phenomenon where the temperature change causes the deep water to rise and the surface water to sink, and the stuff at the bottom, All that decomposition and organic material just comes up and releases gas. It happens, it produces this sulfurous, rotten smell that can carry inland. I wanted to believe that this is what it was, and for some time I did. But that turnover smell should have been outside, coming off the water. But this smell was coming inside. It was strongest at that glass door in the hallway, in the back rooms of the house. It was like something had tracked it in and left it there. Some mornings it was strong enough that Poppy wouldn't eat her breakfast in the kitchen. She would take one step in, freeze up, then back out. Poppy. Well, I need to talk to you about Poppy. She was acting strange in those weeks, and I think it was the first thing that really scared me. Sometime mid-September, Poppy stopped going near the back of the house. She'd always been a creature of routine. She would go in the kitchen in the morning, sit in the window in the living room during the day, and she'd go to the bedroom at night. Her routine took her through the hallway that ran past the sliding door a dozen times a day. But she just stopped. She'd walk to a certain point in the hallway, roughly the point where you could see the glass door at the end of the corridor, and she would sit down and stare at it. There was nothing moving around, and she wasn't looking at the lake outside, but she seemed to be looking at the door itself. She'd sit there for an hour or two at a time, perfectly still except for a low growl. It sounded scared instead of angry. Noodle, meanwhile, continued to be Noodle. He slept on the couch and ate his food, and he would sprawl in the window and watch the lake with that same benign indifference that he gave to everything. But this made me deeply uncomfortable. Why was Poppy the only other living thing in the house that seemed to be aware of what I was feeling? She and I were on the same frequency, picking up this signal that Ethan and Noodle couldn't hear, and that loneliness was worse than the fear that was rising. By the end of September, I started to hear sounds. I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would hear footsteps on our dock. Heavy, soggy steps like someone walking on wood planks with bare feet after going for a swim. The dock was about 30 feet long, and the footsteps would traverse the entire length. Then they would stop. I'd lie in bed with my eyes open, listening to them, and every time, by the time I nudged Ethan awake and he was alert enough to listen, the sound would have stopped. He'd sigh and tell me it was the dock settling, that the wood was contracting in the cold night air, and the first 2 times he said this, I allowed myself to believe it. I mean, who wants to think that there was someone walking out of the lake and onto our dock every night? I like my sleep, thank you very much. By the 4th or 5th time, I stopped waking him up. I would instead lie in the dark and listen to the footsteps come up the dock and stop at the shore end. Then I'd listen to the silence that followed. But it wasn't always a perfect silence. Sometimes I heard faint, almost inaudible, wet weight being dragged slowly across grass. One afternoon in mid-October, I walked out to the dock and I found a trail. It started at the waterline where the lake met the shore, and it went up the dock, across the yard, to the sliding glass door. The grass was pressed flat and slick in a wide path. This was no track or line, but a swath maybe 3 feet across. Something broad and heavy had moved from the water to our house. The grass was darkened and compressed. There was a faint sheen on it, a residue that smelled like the smell in that house. But the trail ended at our glass door. There were no return tracks. How is that possible? It would either have to have gone inside or gone somewhere I couldn't see or track. I called Ethan, who was at work at the time. I described what I saw. He was trying to calm me down, make me feel better. He said it could be a beaver or an otter, but I said it was 3 feet wide. He told me maybe a deer had bedded down and dragged itself. Now he was reaching. Why would a deer do that? The conversation ended, and neither of us had a good explanation. Things were getting creepy. I took some pictures of the trail. By the time Ethan had gotten home at 6, the grass had sprung back and the sheen had dried. But I had proof. I showed him the photos. He looked at them, and after a moment we looked at each other. Neither of us knew what to do, or how serious or unserious it was. But what we came up with was locking the sliding glass door with a dowel rod in the track. I did this every night from then on, and I would check it before bed, then check it again. I swear some nights I would check it a third time, just to help me sleep better. At night, when I lay in the dark listening to the footsteps on the dock and the silence that soon followed, and that sometimes audible faint wet dragging sound across the grass, well, to me, that sounded like something coming out of our waters, walking to our house, and it was doing it every night, and I swear it was getting closer. That sliding glass door was the only thing between it and me. A few nights before Halloween, I saw it. I finally saw it. I woke up sometime past 2, and I was instantly filled with dread. It was accompanied by this pulling sensation, a compulsion that bypassed my brain entirely and spoke directly to my body. It told me to get up, go to the window, and look out at the lake. I've had compulsions before, like the urge to reread an email or refresh a page, but this was different. There was no fighting it. The best way I can describe it was gravity. Like my window became the low point in the room and I began to roll towards it. So I went to the window and I looked out at the water. The moon was up, 3/4 full. The water was that flat, black, textureless nothing like I described earlier, except where the moonlight hit it. And where the moonlight landed, I could see the dock extending out over the water, pale wood on black surface. And at the end of the dock, there was something that had not been there when I went to bed. It was low and crouched on all fours, sitting or standing on the last few planks of the dock, close to the water, and even from the bedroom window, maybe 60 feet away, I could tell it was large, wider than a human, and it looked heavy. It even made the dock look fragile underneath it. It was dark and wet. The moonlight caught moisture on its surface, and it was shifting, small stuttery movements. Its weight rocked from one limb to another, but it wasn't just adjusting position or breathing. It looked like it was trying to hold something in, like the edges of 3D models from the PS1 era. Something hung from the top of it, where the head would be, I think. Long and dark, dripping wet, it hung down to the planks of the dock. It looked like hair, extremely matted hair heavy with water, and it swayed slightly as the thing shifted its weight. It was facing the house. I stood at the window, looking at it, and I meant to look for just a few seconds, long enough to identify what I was seeing, or failed to do so. And then I would wake up Ethan, make him come to the window and see it there, so that for once he would see what I was seeing, and I would stop being alone in all this. That was the plan. A few seconds. When I looked at the clock, it was 2:47. When I woke up, I swear it was only a bit after 2. I'd been standing at that window for what must have been over 40 minutes. The time between looking at the dock and looking at the clock was, in my experience, about 15 seconds. I'd lost 40 minutes of time. This was not me just zoning out and getting absorbed in this strange sighting. It was like my time simply disappeared, or was taken. And when I looked back, the dock was empty. That thing was gone. Downstairs, the sliding glass door was open, and the dowel rod was still in the track. The door had been opened from the outside, lifted off the track and over the dowel, and sat back down. The night air was coming through now, and with it, that thick, rich, immediate smell. I knew that thing had come to our door from the dock. It had pressed itself against the opening and breathed into our house. I wondered, did it come inside? I quickly closed the door. I went upstairs and got into bed, and I covered my face. I didn't sleep. I laid there for so long listening for any noise, but everything remained quiet. In the morning, that smell was still strong. I didn't tell Ethan about what I'd seen. Up to now, he had not been listening to me. He had not been trusting to my experiences. So I just didn't think I should tell him. But there was a thought underneath that. If he wasn't experiencing this as much as I was, then this wasn't about him, was it? Whatever was happening here, I'm pretty sure it was aimed at me. One disturbing night, I woke up standing in the backyard in my pajamas, barefoot in the frost, facing the lake. The grass was so cold it burned, and the sky was that deep pre-dawn black, almost dawn. I was standing about halfway between the house and the shore, with my arms at my sides. No memory whatsoever of leaving my bed or walking downstairs. I was just there. I'd started to sleepwalk, and I had never once sleepwalked before in my life. I went inside, shaking so hard my teeth were clicking together. I woke up Ethan and told him. The look on his face was fear, real fear, which honestly was a relief. Maybe now he would finally take this more seriously, even if the thing he was taking seriously was my mental and physical health, rather than that lake. It happened again 8 days later. This time Ethan found me. I only know what happened because he told me afterward. He woke up at 3 a.m. in the morning and I wasn't in bed. He went downstairs and the sliding glass door was open. He went outside and there I was on the dock, standing at the very end, at the edge. My toes curled over the last plank, looking down into the water. He called my name but I did not respond. He walked out onto the dock, grabbing my arm, and apparently I screamed. A scream he described as the worst sound he'd heard me make. Just pure disorientation and terror. I collapsed against him, sobbing and shaking. I had no idea where I was, how I'd even gotten there, or how long I'd been standing over that water in the freezing dark. He installed a chain lock on the bedroom door the next day. The idea was that I couldn't sleepwalk if the chain was engaged, at least not beyond the bedroom. We latched it together every night too, both of us double-checking it. For 1 week, I stayed in bed. But the week after, I woke up on the dock again, standing at the end, barefoot and freezing, facing the water. Upstairs, the bedroom door was closed. The chain was still latched from the inside, and the sliding glass door was open. I have no way to explain how this happened. Ethan drove me to a doctor that week. The doctor explained that sleepwalking is common in adults under stress. A new house, a new environment could trigger it. She prescribed a low dose of something to help me sleep deeper. I filled the prescription and took it, and I slept through the night for 3 nights in a row. But on the 4th night, I woke back up on the dock. After that, I stopped taking the pills. They weren't keeping me inside. If anything, they might have been keeping me from waking up sooner, keeping me from fighting my way back. Late fall, Poppy disappeared. I came downstairs that morning. She wasn't in any of her usual spots. I checked the hallway where she'd taken to sitting vigil, and my bedroom. Sometimes I would find her under the bathroom sink. It was her safe spot when she was stressed out. But she wasn't there either. I searched the whole house, then I went out into the yard. I walked down the road in both directions, calling her name. Meanwhile, Noodle sat on the porch, watching me. It kinda looked like he pitied me. 2 days later, I found Poppy. For those of you who don't like to read about or hear about harm against animals, be warned. I was standing on the dock in daylight, looking out at the lake because by that point, the lake was where I looked whenever I was missing something. And she was there, about 15 feet out from the end of the dock, floating just below the surface. She was suspended in the clear water, floating like a leaf. She was intact. Her body was whole. Her fur drifted slightly in whatever faint current the springs produced. Her eyes were open and she looked bleached almost, like the color had been drawn out of her calico patches, washed out and faded. She looked like she'd been in the water for way longer than just 2 days. I waded in to get her. The water in late November in Wisconsin is so cold, it's incredibly painful for the first few moments, then becomes this lingering ache the longer you stay in. Every step I took deeper was a step my legs were telling me not to go any further. The water reached my thighs. I was almost to Poppy. I bent down and reached for her when something gripped my ankle. It didn't feel like a fish or weeds. This felt like a hand, a strong hand, and in the half second before I ripped my leg free, I swear to you I felt fingers against my skin. Smooth and cold fingers with what felt like thick webbing between them, pressed up against my ankle as the hand squeezed. It only squeezed once, firmly, as if to get my attention. Then it let go, and I grabbed Poppy's body. I ran out of the water so fast. I was panting and crying, and I might have screamed a couple of times. When I made it to the shore, I collapsed holding my dead cat. I was shaking, and I looked down at my ankle. There was a mark where the hand had been, a white compression that would become a bruise, I could tell. The hand part I didn't tell to Ethan. I told him Poppy must have fallen off the dock at night and drowned. This part was something he believed, but the hand thing, he never would believe. Inside, I was starting to be so angry with him, like I couldn't tell him anything anymore, without some silly explanations that don't explain anything. I felt so trapped, and now my beloved Poppy was dead. I buried Poppy in the yard, near the tree line. She was wrapped in one of my sweatshirts. That night I lay in bed, listening of course to those dock footsteps and the dragging along the grass. I became angry and terrified when I heard that dragging sound approach the yard near her grave. I pulled the covers over my head, and I cried silently. After Poppy, things accelerated. Her death felt like a turning point in the worst possible way. Noodle took up Poppy's post in the hallway, staring at the sliding glass door with ears forward and body still. This should have been comforting, evidence now that Noodle felt something was wrong too. But it was not comforting. Noodle had never reacted that way before, and the fact that he was reacting that way now meant something had changed, and it meant that Noodle was in danger too. One night in early winter, I was lying in bed with the lights off. Noodle was asleep on the comforter beside me, and yet I heard Noodle meowing at the back door. That sound was coming from outside the sliding glass door, down the hall. It was distinctively Noodle's yowling cry, the cry of a cat that wants to be let in. Any cat owner knows what I'm talking about, and it sounded exactly like Noodle. But Noodle was on the bed right next to me. I could even feel the weight of him against my leg, and I could hear his slow, sleeping breaths. These cat calls went on for maybe 3 minutes, a cycle of meow, pause, meow, and each cry was close to right but not quite right. It was sort of warped at the tail end of each meow. Now that part was something that Noodle had never done. Something was standing outside my glass door in the dark, mimicking my cat, trying to lure me outside. The following morning, I found handprints on the outside of the glass, wide and thick-fingered, with smears between the fingers where webbing had dragged across the surface. I was sure of it. They were at my exact height, placed as if to anticipate where my face would be, so I would see them, so I would find them, or perhaps evidence that the thing had peered inside. I took more pictures, and I waited for Ethan to get home. By 6 o'clock, they had dried to faint smudges that could have been anything, and in Ethan's defense, the photos were blurry. When he looked at them, he looked worried but not overly concerned. This time, he didn't even say anything. That silence between us had now become a room we both lived in, but neither of us could leave. Then I started to wake up with my side of the bed damp. I initially thought it was from sweat, but this was cold, and it smelled like lake water, with that deep organic rot sweetness, and it pulled in the depression where my body lay, like someone had poured it there while I slept. Every morning I stripped the bed and washed everything, and every morning the dampness would be back, a cold patch above my pillow and along my shoulder and hip. That smell would cling to my hair and skin. I could smell it on myself throughout every day, even if I showered. I started to have dreams about that lake, and they weren't nightmares. In the dreams, the water was warm and the lake was calm. I walked in from the shore and the water rose around me, and it felt like a warm, wet hug. And it was so comforting. And I could tell in my mind in the dream that there was something waiting in the deep part of the water, down where the springs were, where the light didn't reach. Something patient, and the closer I got, the more it felt like I was going home. I would wake up from these dreams calm, and even feeling better than I had in weeks. But that calmness would soon terrify me, as I realized something was beckoning me into the water, and its calls were working. Of course, I didn't tell Ethan about the dreams. I was running out of things to even tell him. Every piece of evidence I brought to him either degraded before he could see it, or sounded in the daylight like the testimony of a woman who was falling apart. He suggested therapy. I said I didn't need it. We argued about it in the kitchen in low, exhausted voices. And the argument wasn't about therapy. It was about the fact we were now living two different realities, and neither of us could cross into the other's. And that thing in the lake, whether it knew it or not, whether it was capable of strategy or just operated on a predatory instinct, too old and too patient for me to outmaneuver, it was isolating me from the only person in the world I truly loved, the one that could have helped. I'm almost certain now that's what it was doing. It was separating me from Ethan. It was a lion separating the injured gazelle from the rest of the herd. But this thing wasn't using force or speed, but slow, steady application of pressure that made me harder and harder to believe, that made my evidence disappear, made my fear look like illness, until the distance between us was so wide, I was functionally alone, even with him sleeping next to me. It wanted me alone. It wanted me alone, and it wanted me tired, and it wanted me dreaming about warm water, and it was getting everything it wanted. Around the middle of December, I found this article. I was looking things up online, anything about the lake, like its local history or folklore or news items, anything I could find. After finding nothing useful, mainly just a couple of forum posts about lake spirits and water hauntings that read like fiction and offered no specifics, I searched instead the address of the house. After some deep digging, I found a local newspaper archive entry from 6 years earlier. A woman had walked into the lake at night and disappeared. She was the wife of the previous owner. The couple our realtor had said relocated for work. but that wasn't the case. This woman's body was never recovered. Her husband had sold the house a month later and moved to an entirely different state. The official cause was accidental drowning. The article included one quote from a neighbor, identified only as a longtime resident of the lake, who said the woman had been having trouble sleeping in the weeks before she vanished. I read through that article 3 times. Then I put my coat on and I walked around the lake to Dirth's house, and I knocked on his door. He knew why I was there. I could tell by the look on his face before I uttered a word. I think he'd been waiting for this visit, but hoped it wouldn't come. "Dirth," I said, "I need to ask you about the people who lived in our house before us." He didn't answer right away. I even watched as he looked past me to the lake. Then he stepped back from the door and said, "You'd better come in." He made coffee. I sat at his kitchen table, and he moved around the kitchen slowly. I could tell he was reluctant. He sat down across from me and set the mugs between us, and I just waited for him to speak. He wrapped both hands around his mug and stared into it. "The house has had trouble," he said finally. That's the way I'd put it. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind you're having. The Lindstroms. That was the last name of the people that were there before you. And before the Lindstroms, there was another couple. I don't recall the name. Both times, they left fast. Those who were left. And both times, it was the wife." I felt a sting behind my sternum. "What do you mean, it was the wife?" "I mean she was the one having problems. Couldn't sleep, couldn't stop watching the water. Her husband thought it was the isolation. Thought she was getting anxious out here by herself all day. The Lindstrom woman, she used to walk the yard at night. Her husband would find her standing at the shore in just her nightgown. She told him things were coming out of the lake. He had to take her to a doctor." "And what of the woman before her?" "I don't know the specifics. I know they left in a hurry, and I know it was winter when they did. I know that the wife was not well." "Dirth, the people here before us, the Lindstroms, the wife drowned. I found the article. I know she died." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was looking at the table between us at the coffee in his hands once more. "I'm not going to sit here and tell you what's in that lake," he said. "I've lived here my whole life, and I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, because speculation is how you start sounding mad. And sounding mad is exactly how every one of those women got dismissed." The kitchen was quiet after that. The clock was ticking on the wall. Through his window I could see the lake, flat and dark in the late afternoon, but not as dark as it could get. "You need to leave that house," he said, and I could tell he didn't want to say it. "I'm sorry. I should have said something when you moved in. Someone should have said something to you before you even bought the place. But I talked myself out of saying anything when we first met. I thought maybe this time could be different." He shook his head once. "It's not different. It's never different. You need to leave." It was the first time in months another human being had confirmed what I was experiencing. I almost broke apart right there in his kitchen. But I managed to hold it together, and I thanked him. I then walked home around the lake in the late afternoon light, and I forced myself not to look at the water. That night I sat Ethan down and I told him all of it. The hand in the water that grabbed me, the wet sheets, the fake cat sounds, handprints, dreams, and the article about the woman who walked into that lake and was never found. I told him I thought the thing in the lake had done this before, and that it chose the woman in the house, and that now it was choosing me. I said if we didn't leave, it was going to get me the way it got her. I said all of this standing in our kitchen with the lights on and the sliding glass door locked. I watched his face while I said it, and for the first time, he didn't push back on me. Something got through. Maybe the accumulation of everything, but it got through. He said okay, we could leave. He began to pack boxes with me that night. We planned to leave on a Saturday morning. Ethan took a personal day on Friday to pack, and by that evening, the house was half in boxes. The kitchen was mostly done. The living room had been stripped of anything that wasn't furniture. Our bedroom was now just a mattress and some overnight bags. Noodle was already in his carrier by the front door, which I had set up that afternoon because I wanted him to be safe. I wanted at least one living thing in this house to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Noodle sat in his carrier and watched us through the mesh with his wide orange face, and for once he wasn't staring at the hallway or the glass door. He was watching us, and I chose to interpret that as agreement. I should have insisted that we leave that night. I knew this at the time, and I know it now. My very soul was telling me to go now, go in the dark, get in the car and drive. But Ethan was exhausted, and the car was not fully loaded, and it seemed irrational to flee at 10 o'clock at night when we were leaving at just 7 in the morning. So I did what I'd been doing for months. I rationalized, telling myself 9 hours didn't matter, that the dowel was in the track and the chain was on the bedroom door and Ethan was with me and it would be fine. Just one more night. We went to bed at 11. I lay there on our stripped mattress with a single blanket, listening to the house. And for a change, there were no footsteps on the dock or dragging in the grass. The house was so quiet. It hadn't been that way in months. Ethan fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I lay there and watched the ceiling and waited for the sound that would surely come. I'd been conditioned to it. But I fell asleep at some point. I must have. Because the next thing I experienced was not a continuation of lying in bed, but a sharp, gasping return to consciousness. And I was not in my bed. I was in the lake. I was standing waist deep in black water in the dark, and the cold was so total and immediate that my body had not yet processed it. I was past shivering, past gasping for air, in some sort of suspended state where my nervous system was still compiling the information and had not yet delivered the full report. My feet were on the lake bottom, the silty, soft bottom that I remembered from summer, from swimming, back when this water was something I loved and I could feel the ground sloping away in front of me. The shelf. The drop-off where the shallows ended and the deep part began, where 80 or 90 feet of black water sat above springs that never stopped flowing, a bottom that no one had ever actually seen. I was standing at the edge of it. One more step, and the ground would fall away, and the water would take me. I must have sleepwalked again. I had no memory of getting out of bed or coming out here. I'd walked out while unconscious, exactly where it wanted me. The smell was everywhere, fully concentrated all around me, rising from the water, so thick I could taste it on my tongue. The lake at night was the flattest, blackest thing I'd ever seen. No reflection at all, not even moonlight. Just abyssal water in every direction, and the shore behind me. But now it seemed so impossibly far away. My house beyond it with the lights off and the doors open. I then felt it below me. Not touching me, but there in the water around my legs. A current of movement. Something was circling beneath the surface, just below me, moving slow. I could feel the water shifting against my skin as it passed. I looked down. I wish I hadn't. In the faint ambient light, I could see a shape under the surface. Broad, dark, and low, orbiting me. I saw hair fanning out behind it, or from it. Long dark hair spreading in the water like weeds. I saw a hand, too. It drifted up from the shape of it, and it came to rest against my thigh. It didn't grip, but it held on, like it had been waiting for a friend who had finally arrived. I heard Ethan screaming my name from the shore. His voice was so distant and raw. He must have woken up in bed, realizing I was gone, only to find his wife standing in a freezing lake in the dark. The exact situation of the former residence. I knew he was coming for me, to rescue me, but my legs would not respond to my will. The hand on my thigh was gentle and the water around me was cold, but that cold was fading. Or was I fading? Somewhere beneath my terror was that feeling from my dreams. That warmth, the all-encompassing comfort and relief. Something was telling me not to fight, to just let go, and the water would take me somewhere that wasn't here, but was better, and all my exhaustion, fear, and loneliness would finally end. The bottom shifted under me. The silt gave way to nothing. I was at the shelf. One more step and the hand tightened. That thing rose toward me. I felt the water surge as it came up from below. And for a split second, it was directly in front of me, face to face, and I could feel its breath in the water against my chest. A rhythmic pulse of displaced water from something that was breathing underwater, or simulating it at least. Its other hand came up and touched my arm. I watched as its mouth opened. I felt this part more than I saw it, a widening in the dark shape inches from my face. But it kept going past where a mouth should stop. It made a sound then, a sound that did not come from it, not even from above the water. It was in the water. It traveled through the lake and into my body. I felt it in my spine and teeth, a low vibration, and I immediately knew what it meant. Come with me. Suddenly, Ethan had me. He was in the water waist deep. His hands were under my arms, and he was hauling me backward, and that thing let go. Ethan did not overpower it. Ethan is 170 pounds, an IT guy who goes to the gym twice a week. He had not wrestled me free from something that lives in 80 feet of black water. It released me. It let me go, just like it had chosen to let go of my ankle when I got Poppy. It let me go because it decided to, and the decision was not about Ethan, and it wasn't about force. I'm only alive now because I was allowed to leave. Whatever it is, it didn't want to take me by force. It takes only if you choose to go. Ethan dragged me to the shore. I was coughing and gasping, and I was so freezing cold, my muscles had stopped working properly. My legs buckled when I hit the bank. He pulled me up onto the grass and I collapsed, and so did he, next to me. We lay there on the frozen ground in the dark, soaked from the waist down. I could hear his rapid breathing, and I heard the lake behind us, still black and so very silent. Nothing followed us out. Ethan and I did not go back inside the house. He carried me to our car, placing me carefully in the passenger seat. He then wrapped me in the emergency blanket from the trunk. He went back for Noodle in her carrier by the front door, and that was it. That was all we took. He started the car, and we drove away from that house at 1:30 in the morning. The heater was on full blast. and the windows were up. The two of us live in Madison now. We're in a third-floor apartment. There are no lakes or ponds nearby. We're surrounded on all sides by concrete, asphalt, and other people. I should feel safe, right? During the day, mostly, I do. We never did go back for our things. Ethan arranged with a moving company to empty the house and put everything in storage. I told him I didn't want any of it, and he had no arguments or debates about that. The house went on the market in February. I've got no idea what the realtor told the new buyers about why we left. I imagine she said we relocated for work. Ethan and I are okay, but I choose that word carefully. We're functional, and we're together, and we're trying. The space between us that lake had created is still there, but it's smaller now. Some nights he reaches for me in the dark, and I let him hold me, and we don't talk about what happened. That's the good silence, different from what we had at the lake, and I can live with that. But I still dream about the water, even though it's less frequent. At most, once a week. In those dreams, the lake is warm and the water is calm. I walk in and something is still waiting for me in the deep part, patient as it's always been, and I can feel that enticing comfort beckoning me. I wake from those dreams calm and rested, and that still disturbs me. I've started to wonder whether the calm will always terrify me, or whether there will come a point when I finally get over it. Noodle is fine and alive. He's developed a new behavior that I have not mentioned to Ethan yet, though. He seems to stare at the drains in the house. He sits at the edge of the bathtub and watches the drain for a good 10 minutes at a time. His ears will be forward and his body still, and he's so intensely focused. It reminds me of Poppy when she would stare at the sliding glass door. He does the same thing at the kitchen sink, sitting there on the counter staring down into the drain, not moving for some time. I watch him watching it, and I tell myself it's just a cat being a cat. Cats fixate on small dark holes and creepy dark corners. They're wired to watch for prey. But then I remember I had told myself that sliding glass door would stay locked, and I was wrong then. One more thing. One night not too long ago, I woke up, and my feet were wet. I live on the 3rd floor, as I said before. There's no lake. My feet were wet and the sheets at the bottom of the bed were damp. When I sat up and looked at the floor, there were footprints on the hard wood, leading from the front door to my side of the bed and back to the door. I haven't told Ethan, and I pray it's all in my head. I lock and deadbolt the door every night, and I always lie down in bed before going to sleep, just listening for so very long. I pray it lets go of me. I just don't know how long that's gonna be. Well, that was an emotional roller coaster. Rip Poppy, and rip Ethan's marriage. This just goes to show you, if a loved one reports some boogeyman activity, you'd better listen if you enjoy your cozy life, or it may turn into a nightmare you can't wake up from. Good night. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find Unexplained Encounters episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcast apps, or on YouTube on the Darkness Prevails channel. Send me your stories at darkstories.org. And don't forget to like, follow, and share if you want to scare your friends. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Send your scariest workplace stories to us at eeriecast.com/submit, and rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
They say you should separate work life and personal life, but sometimes that's not the problem, because you can date your coworkers just fine with no problems. But apparently the ghosts back at home will still have something to say. Welcome back, fellow coffee lovers. Today I've got a wonderful set of new scary work stories for you, featuring ghosts aplenty, and why one former camp counselor can never go back to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Enjoy. These are tales from the break room. The Nun in Uniform, from Perry Rogers. When I was in college, I started working at a uniform store and factory. The place was divided into two places. At the front was reception, a waiting area, and the fitting rooms. At the back of the property was the factory. The place was loaded with fabrics and had rows and rows of racks with sample uniforms. The second floor of the factory was more like a balcony that looked over the racks of uniforms and fabrics. That is where the sewing machines and irons were. I usually worked at the front, taking orders, measuring clients in the fitting rooms, but sometimes I was asked to bring sample uniforms from the back or to ask my coworkers to iron some pieces of clothing or sew hems of pants. But I was rarely back there, and even less so at night. One time, though, we had an important delivery that needed to be made for the next day early in the morning. I was sent to help iron some of the clothes, so they were nice and packed for delivery. It got dark pretty soon, and only one of my coworkers and I were in the second floor ironing and packing the uniforms. When it was past 7, and we had been there for more than an hour, I started to feel dizzy, and my head felt heavy. I thought I was just getting tired. I got up and started to walk across the floor, hoping that would help me feel better. When I'd made 2 circuits around the machines, I suddenly started to feel cold. I looked down from the balcony, thinking about getting a jacket from the racks. While I was looking around to decide which jacket I could borrow, I saw from the corner of my eye some movement on the racks farthest from me. Immediately, I turned around, since no one else was supposed to be there, and down there were no windows that could cause a draft. The first floor wasn't very well lit, so I was thinking it must have been my imagination. But then I saw it. Between 2 lines of racks on the back, I saw a tall black figure. It appeared to be wearing a nun habit, complete with the headpiece and a veil on the face. I immediately jumped back and screamed. My coworker, who was just hanging some pants, looked at me and laughed. I looked at her with a terrified look on my face. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked me. I was in shock and could only nod, no words coming out of my mouth. "Yeah, we just pretend we don't see her. It's better we don't acknowledge her or weird things start to happen," she said in a very calm voice. I was still processing what I'd seen. I looked down from the balcony again, but the figure was gone. Did I actually see something down there? I finally asked my coworker. "I can tell you you're not the first to see her. But what do you think?" she answered. I don't know. I'm definitely not staying after hours again," I said with a shaky voice. My coworker just laughed again, and we finished packing all the uniforms. I did have to stay after hours a few other times, though, but I never did look down from the balcony again. (1995) From Catastrophic. This happened back in the summer of '95 when I was 21. I worked as a camp counselor up in the Catskills. It was my first time doing the job, and to be honest, I was mostly in it for easy money and the chance to get out of the city for a few months. One night I'm on solo overnight duty, which basically meant I had to stay up and keep an eye on the campgrounds while the kids were sleeping. It's honestly an easy assignment. Just me, a crappy little cabin, and a whole lot of peace and quiet. I was sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette, trying to stay awake, when I started to hear this weird noise coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was the wind, maybe some nocturnal critters doing their things. But the more I listened, the more it started to sound like footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Now, I'm not exactly a nature guy, so my mind immediately jumps to the worst case scenario. I was thinking, crap, what if it's a bear? Or maybe some crazy axe murderer? I started to low-key panic, but I'm also trying to play it cool. I'm the adult here, I reminded myself. Can't be freaking out over some random noises in the woods. But then the footsteps started to get closer, and I swear I could hear this low, guttural breathing sound, like a growl. At that point, I was pretty much crapping myself, also frozen in place. I was sitting there, white-knuckling my cigarette, waiting to see what fresh heck is about to come bursting out of the tree line. And then I spot this pair of eyes, reflecting back eye shine, staring at me from the dark. They're these big and round eyes, almost floating in midair, like some kind of disembodied forest demon. I just about soiled myself right then and right there. Finally, I scrambled to my feet, ready to run back inside and barricade the freaking door, when the thing with the glowing eyes begins to move closer. And as it steps into the moonlight, I don't see a bear, nor an axe murderer, nor a demon. It's just a freaking deer. Just a totally normal, harmless deer, probably out looking for a midnight snack. But in my paranoid, sleep-deprived state, I'd managed to convince myself that I was about to star in my own personal horror film. I felt like an idiot. The deer just kind of stared at me for a minute, probably making fun of me in its head. Then it wandered off back into the woods, like nothing ever happened. Meanwhile, I'm standing there with my heart pounding out of my chest, feeling like the biggest wuss in the world. I didn't tell any of the other counselors about it the next day, because I didn't want to look like a total wuss. But I gotta say, that was hands down the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in the woods. And I wasn't even in any actual danger. Just goes to show you how your mind can play tricks on you when you're out in the middle of nowhere, I guess. That's my story. Not exactly a brush with Bigfoot or anything, but it sure as heck felt like it was about to be one. Definitely made me rethink the whole easy money thing. From then on, I was more than happy to let someone else take over the overnight watch. In and Out, from Noon 3. Not too long after I turned 18, I moved out of my mom's place into a house in town not too far from her. I'd plans of moving with a friend, but that didn't work out, so it was just my pupper, Celine, and 2 rabbits, Footloose and Bits. I'd been working and going to school in this town for a few months before I moved. I was overjoyed to not only have a place to myself, but an actual house. It was small, but perfect to me. The house was on the older side, about 50 years old. It was coming to the end of summer when I moved in. I was used to having problems everywhere I moved, but with this house, I got to blame all the typical noises I would hear on the old house. After a couple of months of being there, I'd invited my work friend to hang out whenever we had time. He would stay the night every now and again, so he would hear the house noises too every time he stayed over. At this time of my life, I'm used to hearing footsteps, knocking, voices calling my name, and objects being moved about to places they have no business being. To me, everything that started to happen was normal. To my friend, though, he was not as used to it as I was. He had some experiences in his own life, but nowhere near this severe. The first few months were normal. I picked up a few tips and tricks over the years to deal with these types of things, But one day, I woke up to some sad news. I went to check on my bunnies, who I let run openly in the mudroom, so they had more space the night before. There was a disaster in the room, though, far too much for 2 bunnies to have done themselves. There I found Footloose, dead, with Bits huddled in a corner, shaking and terrified. The poor baby didn't want to come to me, and even ran when I got close. I moved Bits' cage to the second bedroom and cleaned everything up. These were once injured wild bunnies, and were too young to survive on their own, so I took them in and fixed them up. Footloose had been missing half of one of her back feet, and Bits had chunks torn out of her back and ears. I was so sad seeing what I found when I woke up. My friend and I were just in there with them the night before, feeding and watering them. The 2 bunnies were so happy before, having their zoomies once I let them out of the cage. About a week after that, we found Bits dead as well. This killed me. There was no way they could have just dropped dead overnight for no reason. After I discovered this, with no rhyme or reason to it, I decided to take action. I smudged the whole house with sage, and I had it blessed. For those who don't know, sage is not meant to kick spirits out, but rather put them at ease, put them to sleep, so to speak. Once I completed the smudging, I began with expelling the place. This involved putting sigils on every entry into the house, doors and windows alike. After that, I covered the sigils in herbs and oils and blessed them. I know that not many people believe in these kinds of things, but I feel that, if performed properly, it can make a big difference. The moment I'd finished with my cleansing, you could feel a weight lift from the place. The air didn't seem so thick, and I even felt lighter. For the next 3 months, we didn't have a single problem. Later on one night, I was in the living room watching TV, waiting for my friend to get off work. It was about 10 p.m., and he wouldn't be over until 11. It had been snowing that night, and there was a nice layer of snow on the ground, maybe 2 inches thick. I thought I heard what sounded like someone walking on the wooden porch in heavy boots. I was sitting on the couch with my back to the window, which led to the porch, so this startled me. I looked out the window to check, and I didn't see anyone. A few minutes later, I heard it again, so I took another look. Still, there was no one out there. I even looked down at the snow, checking for prints, but didn't find any. It happened again, and I just ignored it that time. And I think whatever it was didn't like that I ignored it, because a few minutes later, the footsteps came back, followed by a pounding on the screen door. Now, I'm a very paranoid person, so I have both the main and screen door locked at all times when I'm home. I looked out the window over to the door, and of course, saw nothing. The pounding happened again, but this time it was so hard, both doors began to shake. I went over to unlock the main door, keeping the screen one locked. No one was there, and there were no footprints on my lawn. My dog was out back, and I kept the back door open when she was out there, so I could hear her clearly, but I kept the screen shut. She's a husky, so she screams at me when she's ready to come in. This dog is the most mild-mannered husky you would ever find. She gets her zoomies and only speaks when she needs to. There's only one reason she would ever bark. That's if someone comes into her living space without me present. If I'm there, she'll stay between my legs, in front or behind me, but remain silent. After I'd locked the door back up, I heard Celine start to bark. I ran to the back and looked to see who was there. There was no one out there in the alley, nor in the yard next door. The top screen was missing from the back door, so once I was there, my dog would jump through that part to get to me without me having to open the door. So when I got there, she ran and jumped inside. I rushed to take off her line, to toss it back out the window, slamming the back door shut in the same motion and locking it. By this time, I hear the knocking on the front door again. When I go to look this time, I'm relieved. It's my friend. I quickly let him in, and I ask him if he saw anything weird outside. He replied no, and I went on with my night. About a week later, I was snuggled up with my dog, listening to some stories and about to fall asleep, when I heard a tapping coming from the window next to me. It made me jump. My first thought was that it was a branch tapping in the wind. Then it happened again, so that confirmed to me it was a tree, so I got snuggled back up. Oh, how wrong I was when the tapping came again, but this time at a completely different window, and slightly louder than before. My dog then took note of it as well, so I knew I had to stay alert. Slowly but surely, the tapping moved throughout all the windows, getting louder and louder each time. It completely circled the house before it just stopped, and everything went silent. It took me longer to fall asleep that night, but I eventually did. My friend moved in a couple of days after that and soon became my boyfriend. When spring came around, we were home alone when some guy in a pickup truck just came up, asking if I needed anyone to do lawn care. I told him no and said thanks and that we took care of it. The grass hadn't even reached 2 inches yet, so it didn't need any work at the moment. I'd never seen that man, nor his truck, in my neighborhood before, so I made a point of remembering what they looked like. I went and told my boyfriend what happened, describing the truck to him. He had never seen it either. About a week and a half later, I was outside playing with my dog when the same truck pulled up across the street. I kept it in sight, but acted as if I was too focused on the dog. The man sat in his truck for a few minutes before getting out and walking over to me. Now, I'm a smaller person, and I do not like when someone I don't know approaches. He asked once more if I needed anyone to do yard work. I replied no, but then he asked if I lived alone. I told him yes, I did, even though I didn't. After that, he left, and I stared at him until he drove away. I told my boyfriend about what happened again, even telling him that I lied about living alone. He laughed at this. I would notice from time to time that truck just sitting across the street with someone sitting inside. There was one day that I had to work a day shift, so the two of us had to leave home around 9 a.m. I took my boyfriend to his dad's place in the next town over before heading on in. For context, my boss is my next-door neighbor. He came in about an hour after I did. He asked if my boyfriend was still at the house, and I said no. Then he said that my front door was sitting wide open since 10 a.m. But I know that I'd locked the door before I left. After learning this, I got a call from a number that I did not recognize. It was someone saying they had my dog, that she somehow just came running into their yard and sat with them. I thanked him for holding on to her and made a run to go get her with my boss. Once I got back to my house, lo and behold, both doors were wide open. The two of us went inside and went through the whole place. Nothing was missing, nothing was even out of place. So I locked back up and we went back to work. Once my boyfriend got to work, I told him what happened, and he confirmed for me that I had locked the door. This is the incident that started a domino effect. A few nights after that happened, I was awakened by a weird noise. I lifted my head up groggily and looked around. I saw the closet door rattling. It was the only thing moving, and I was tired, so I just said, "Can you not right now? I'm so tired of this bullcrap." And it just stopped. I immediately fell back to sleep. I didn't get around to cleansing the house again for a while, as I didn't really have the time to. It's a time-consuming process. Well, because of this, the normal activity began again. The footsteps, knocking, hearing my name and objects moving around. And the closet door joined in every now and again. For that, all I had to do was ask it to stop. And for some reason, it would listen. We ended up going to a New Year's party at our boss's house. I was closing that night, so I got there late, and I was in my work uniform. We were in the garage playing beer pong, listening to music. There were only 7 of us. 3 left after a couple of hours. Since we were about 15 stumbling steps away, I wasn't watching how much I was drinking. At one point I needed to use the restroom, so I walked out of the garage and turned my head to my dining room windows to see my dog watching us. In the other window, I saw the silhouette of someone. I ran inside, tripping on the steps on the way up. When I opened the door, it was just my dog. When I went back, I told my boyfriend what I saw. He looked over, saw nothing, but said that he would keep an eye out. At one point, he went to go to the bathroom and came back. He told me that he saw something too. We eventually went home together and went to bed. Before long, we had another work friend move in with us. He moved into the second room. 2 weeks after that, I got a request to take in 2 coworkers who were living in their car for a week or 2, just until they could find a place. Then about a week after that, I got another request of the same thing. So we had a full house. The 2 girls in the living room and the other guy in the mudroom. It was me and the 2 girls in my bedroom playing a board game. We suddenly all just stopped making noise and listened, because there was this eerie but quiet voice coming from inside the bathroom. We slowly crept to the door. It sounded like a little girl calling for the name Timmy or maybe Tommy. Just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We opened up the bathroom door, but there was no one in the bathroom. We looked at each other, then hesitantly went back to our game. Maybe 2 weeks after this, my boyfriend and I were sitting in the room watching anime and eating lunch. I was trying to share my food with my pupper, but she wouldn't come close enough to get it. I knew she really wanted it. She just wouldn't come grab it. I do spoil her, and I will normally either share my food or make her her own plate. She's an amazing dog, so she deserves it all. Seeing her act like that, I decided to record. I used Snapchat to film. Using it, I can put on a filter that makes it easier to see the unseen. I made a slow circle of the room. Once I got to the spot she refused to move to, my trash and table were there. I lingered in that area for a moment. I was just about to end the video when the outline of a face popped into view. I left it at that. We both figured it was how it picked up the trash there. We then talked about how Celine was reacting to that spot. When we said her name, the face looked towards the door, where Celine then shows up a few seconds later. Not too long after that, we moved out of that house. This will bring you to the present, what is currently happening and what had happened over the past couple of years. After we moved out of our last house, my boyfriend and I, together for 2 years at the time, moved in with his dad, as well as our pupper Celine. His dad is a disabled veteran living in a big house on his own. For both financial and personal reasons, we moved in the next town over. It's a small town with 2 gas stations and a grocery store. Not much else, other than this hotel. During the time, we also worked at a nursing facility. This will be relevant later. Now, his dad's basement was just as big as the upstairs area, mostly just an open area with 2 rooms down there. The rooms were connected, but a piece of plywood divided them. We took the smaller of the 2, as that was my boyfriend's bedroom before he moved out. It was mostly set up, so we put the spare items in the basement in the open space. The very first night we stayed, I had to get up and go to the bathroom. Now, I was already having trouble sleeping, as we just moved into the place. It was new to me, strange. I went upstairs to go to the bathroom at one point. As soon as I got to the kitchen, I saw a reflection of rotting feet standing in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen. I thought, nope, and took the route through the gym room to the bathroom. When I got back, I saw nothing and went downstairs. The next morning, I told my boyfriend about it. He was curious, as he had never seen nor heard anything while living there before. Now, before this happened, I had come across at one point a Dybbuk box. Well, it wasn't a true Dybbuk box, but something like one. It was said to contain a spirit and followed similar rules to a Dybbuk box. If you don't know, a Dybbuk box comes from Judaism. It is created to hold an evil spirit, or a demon, commonly referred to as a Dybbuk in that culture. I knew from when I obtained it, the first thing I needed to do was find out what kind of spirit was inside. Because of this, I never allowed the box to set foot in the house to prevent anything from attaching itself. However, that did not stop it from coming inside, apparently, because I believe that is what I saw on the first night I was there, those rotting feet. Once I came to this conclusion, I expelled anything that could be in the house for the time being. After the first 2 weeks of us being there, one of our old roommates could not find a place to stay, so he moved in for a few weeks until he could secure housing. This was an uneventful few weeks, not hearing nor seeing anything. Then the day he left, he was going through things, making sure to take his items only. And then he came across the box and brought it inside. He wanted to see if it was ours. I was surprised and a bit angry. I wanted to go off on him as to what he had done. Starting the next day is when activity began again. I started getting the feeling of being watched. Even when I was home alone, I felt eyes on me at all times. His dad decided to go to the gathering of the Juggalos. It was a few states over, so he was gone for an entire month. My boyfriend and I had alternating days off, as we were the only two in our department at the time. During this time, I thought I was going insane. Anytime I was home alone, I would hear someone walking around upstairs. I'm paranoid, so I would go and sweep the upstairs for someone every time I heard it. I finally asked my boyfriend if he had any problems while he was home alone, and he said he hadn't heard a thing. His dad finally got back, and I could blame all the footsteps on him walking around the house, so I never classified anything other than what I saw the first night as truly paranormal. Though I was used to it happening my entire life, I always searched for some doubt. Now you should know we are treated like the Munsters, the three of us. We got the old rundown place at the end of the block, always clad in black, and the townspeople avoid us at all costs. We were also apparently the only house that would decorate for spooky time. The other houses would decorate for every holiday but Halloween. We really stuck out like a sore thumb in that town. We don't have people coming door to door selling or pitching anything because of this. On a random summer day, I had my mom, little siblings, and her fiancé over. We were all gathered around the living room table, playing Cards Against Humanity, when there was a loud knock on the front door. It was so loud, every last one of us jumped. His dad got up and went to take a look, only to find no one there. We continued on with our game. Eventually, like my mom always does, she brought the conversation topic to the paranormal, and she started to rant. I did mention the things I heard there, and of course how the other two never noticed it. I just tell her it's all right. Maybe I'm just going crazy. But my mom gives me this look because she knows. Suddenly, the stove timer went off. This was an older stove with one of those dial timers. We never used it. His dad never even used it a single day he had lived there. But he did mention at one point he had a problem with it going off on its own. It then became pretty common to walk in at night or early morning only for the timer to go off. Something I found out after living there a few months. His dad would typically go to a city 2 hours away every Saturday night. He had taken a break from that during his 2-month-long trip, but he was starting to go out again, and we were invited to join. We told him no the first few times he asked, but eventually we relented and went with him one Saturday. Well, it turned out that most of his friends were rock stars and rappers. He went every week to their shows. After one night, we got back early in the morning. I noticed my dog was a little more anxious than normal. She does have separation anxiety, but this seemed a lot worse than that. She refused to move out of her kennel. We never locked her in there, it's her safe space, so the door is always kept open. No matter what I did, get her toys or treats, she did not want to move from her kennel. She acted as if she was in trouble, but looking through, there was nothing out of place, so there would be no reason for her to be in trouble. I went and sat in the kennel with her, and she laid her head on me, glancing around the basement as she did. After a few minutes, I got her to come and lay in bed with me. She kept her focus on the door even after I shut it. This is the only time I've ever seen her affected this way. She is a strong girl. If she's with me, she stays behind me or between my legs, allowing me to take action for things. But if she's alone, she takes charge of things. I like watching her goof off, so I'll spy on her through the windows when she's out and about. A couple of days after this, I was off work and just got back from taking my boyfriend to work. I let her outside and I was starting laundry. She was out there for a total of 10 minutes before I heard her start to bark. This dog only barks for one reason. Any other time, she just screams at us to get our attention. The joys of owning a husky. So it really threw me off to hear her bark like that. I ran outside, and there was no one there. She doesn't just bark at random people. She only barks if someone she does not know walks onto our property without one of us around. When I found her, she was staring into the garage, so I went and took a look inside. Still no one. I went ahead and rushed her back inside. She's a beautiful dog, so I'm always afraid of someone coming and taking her. About 2 weeks after that, my boyfriend's dad told me how he had the exact same thing happen to him. He put her out, heard her barking a few minutes later, and said he was confused since he had never heard her bark like that before. He thought that maybe another dog came for a visit. When he went out, he saw nothing there, so he just brought her back inside. Since then, we got a camera so we could watch her while she's out, but it's never happened again. And that catches you up for the last couple of years. Disaster in the Forest. From Lumine. I am a travel writer for a rather well-known travel magazine. I've been to almost every country in the world. I've seen and experienced many different things in my 35 years of life. I've been at this job since the tender age of 20, and my first run-in with something bizarre has never left the forefront of my mind. I was working with local hikers in a small town in Peru. I was writing an article for the magazine about the small towns of Peru, and which ones were quite interesting and kind to travelers. I was visiting one that had beautiful hiking areas, and the locals there were all kind-hearted, but they tended to stay out of the forest. When I inquired as to why, they fell silent and had refused to answer me, but the fear in their eyes was obvious. I naturally assumed it had something to do with a predator, perhaps even a tribe of some sort that wasn't so friendly. Needless to say, the only guides I could get on these trails were people who were from a town 20 minutes away, and I had to pay a rather hefty fee. We set out around 2 o'clock in the afternoon after much talking and packing supplies, but even these guides seemed ill at ease. I noticed that the deeper we went into the forest, the darker and more dense it became. I was beginning to feel unnerved. The different sounds around me were so alien, but we eventually came to a part of the trail that was overtaken by weeds. The path just disappeared underneath a dense carpet of greenery. The air was humid, and we decided to take a small break. I looked at my watch as we rested. It was already 4. We'd been hiking for hours, and it had not seemed that long. We had camping materials with plans to settle in the forest overnight, but something nagging at my senses told me that might not be such a good idea. I was going to voice my concerns, but the guide had begun clearing his area, and so I naturally fell into the habit of helping out. Then off we went again. The guides seemed to calm down, but we were vigilant as we began the long trek through the forest, now without a path. I had no idea where we were and how we were going to get back to town, and it was then I realized how lost we truly were. If the guides were out of sight, or if they decided to abandon me, nobody would know, and I would never get out of here. We lit lanterns and continued into the night, stopping at 10 o'clock. We were exhausted by then, so we set up camp and ate some of the rations we brought with us, voicing stories to calm our nerves, and even drank some of the local beer, which was a lot stronger than I was used to. I'm almost ashamed to admit that I passed out around the campfire. The last thing I heard was the guides laughing at my expense. When I came to, it was still extremely dark, and the guides were in their tent, leaving me by the now dimmed fire. I was unnerved by how quiet the forest was. There wasn't even a sound, so I took out my notebook and began to write about my experience so far, plotting what to write in the article. I fed the fire a few branches until it was glowing cheerfully. The crackling of the fire and the sound of my pencil were the only noises then. I thought that was unusual, so I paused. My guides had not moved. I crept to their tent to try to rouse them, but realized they had gone quiet too. When I looked inside, they were gone. How long they'd been gone, I had no idea. I began to panic. All alone out here, no sense of direction. I took off with my headlamp, calling their names, calling out for anyone, with nothing more than the vague idea of where we'd come from. That was the worst idea. I would remain lost for a few days. I drank puddle water to keep me going. Not sure how I never got sick. But I did manage to find the village again. I was dehydrated, starving, and exhausted, and I tried to desperately explain what happened. The locals only frowned, sitting me down and telling me of the evil spirits of the forest. But to me, I'd simply picked a terrible place to write an article about. The locals even begged me not to write about it. Going in those woods only upsets the spirits. I heard years later that the locals there banned tourists from the forest altogether after too many accidents. I was incredibly lucky myself to have made it out alive. Not sure how I really managed to stumble out of there and find the village again, but I am glad to be alive. A Lost Soul from Leandor. Of all these strange encounters I've had, there's one that really takes the cake. It always sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. Sometimes I don't know if it was meant for me to see or not, but my family believes it was fate for me to encounter this. It was 2021. I'd landed a job at a fast food joint, KFC specifically. I loved working both day or night shift. Since I was new to the place, I of course had to undergo training, but thankfully it was paid. It took place at night when it wasn't so busy. I was happy even though I had to go home late. I never had to worry about transport either since I had my own car. My training went smoothly, then I started to work normally. And for a while, nothing weird happened. A few months into the job, though, I was assigned to do overtime. One of my colleagues was on maternity leave, so we had to cover her shifts. During that period, I left around 11:45 p.m. I always passed by a filling station. There was one odd thing that I didn't at the time think was unusual. Every time I passed by there, I would see a woman hitchhiking. On this particular day, I decided to stop as it was raining and thundering out. I rolled down my window there and I spoke to her. "Hey, I don't know where you're going, but I can't let you just get drenched in the rain. It's not safe out here." The first weird thing was the moment I stopped, I had this feeling of unease. But I didn't take it seriously yet. Perhaps it was just anxiety with speaking to a new person. It was around 12:05 a.m. when I stopped. The young lady, who seemed to be in her mid-20s, flashed a smile at me, then got in my passenger seat. "Hi, I'm Tanisha. I need a ride home. Can you help me out?" she said in a soft and friendly voice. I flashed a smile back and said, "No need to worry. I'll make sure you get home safe and sound. Call me Lindor." I then turned on the heater and began to drive. As I drove, that feeling of unease grew stronger, and I wasn't sure why. I thought maybe I was shaken up by the strong lightning and thunder outside. But I continued on. Tanisha was quite the chatterbox. She just kept the conversation going. At one point, I lent her my jacket to help her get warm, as my heaters weren't the best. When I got to her place, it was 2:30. I dropped her off, and I waited until I saw her disappear at the corner of the house. Then I began to drive home. On my way back home, that feeling of unease was gone. I made it home around 5. It was my lucky day, as I wouldn't have to go into work that day. So I got home and went straight to bed. The following day was a Sunday, and I drove ahead to Tanisha's house. When I got there, I met someone who looked like her, but older. I introduced myself. "Hello, ma'am, my name's Lindor. Friday during the heavy rain, I gave a young lady a ride. I dropped her off right here. I'm here to pick up my jacket she borrowed." The lady turned around and started to call. "Anna, there's a young man out here claiming to have given you a lift Friday. Wants his jacket back." Anna came out with a confused look in her eyes. She didn't bother greeting. She went straight to the point. "I don't know you, man. Are you sure you gave me a ride or some girl just played you?" I was a bit shocked for a moment, before coming back to my senses and saying, "Oh, sorry, it's not you. She looked like you, but a bit older. She said her name was Tanisha?" "What?" Both the mother and daughter asked at the same time. Then the mother started to sob. She then said, "Son, did you say Tanisha?" I nodded, but she kept quiet for a moment. Then she signaled Anna with her eyes, and Anna went back inside, then came back out with a photo album. They asked again if she was the one I gave a ride to, pointing her picture out to me. I said yes. The mother went silent for a minute, before saying, "Son, I don't know what you're playing at. Tanisha died in a hit-and-run accident about 2 years ago, coming back from work. But if you truly saw her, that's not good." They checked the whole house, even her bedroom, but the jacket was nowhere to be found. I decided to forget about my jacket. I just left, but things changed because I never saw the hitchhiking Tanisha ever again. Maybe my visit to her family set her free somehow, or perhaps something they did after the fact set her free. After all, there is a traditional ceremony performed if a person died on the road or at the hospital. It is believed that it helps guide that person's soul to the right place. Sometimes they are believed to linger around and disturb the living otherwise. A week later, I came into contact with her mother. She told me they found my jacket. It was neatly placed nearby a tree next to Tanisha's grave. They told me they did the ritual to set her spirit free that night. That made me realize that sometimes we come across people who just need help. Sometimes these people don't know they're no longer alive. To this day, I refrain from driving at night or working night shifts. Don't work alone. From Elias. A year ago now, I'd worked as a camp director for an art camp located in the Blue Ridge area of North Carolina. We were open for 5 years, all summer long, and had several dozen students, many of whom were here every year. We had one of the best art programs in the area, and we had a waiting list of several dozen more potential students. We had students who learned watercolor painting, others who did sculpting, and even more who were into the most popular programs, online art and photography. I worked closely with the photography department, often taking over the classes when the teacher was gone for the day, either due to illness or complications with her pregnancy. I took these students around the woods fairly often, whenever they were in my charge. We would often spot flowers or animals in the woods, pausing with our cameras to snap a picture of the flora and fauna. I had a student in my very last class I had attended. As usual, we went to the all-too-familiar trail, but they were learning low-light photography, so we had to go in the early hours of the night. It was past curfew, but we had permission that evening. It was myself and 2 other counselors who led the night walk. We tried to be quiet so the animals wouldn't flee from us, and the students attempted and many succeeded in capturing absolutely gorgeous pictures of the night and the animals therein. One student, named Simon, captured something that halted us in our tracks. It was an image captured when he used his flash that we hadn't seen in the darkness otherwise. It was a picture of an old man, impossibly tall and pale, with a long beard that reached his chest. He had unkempt hair and a wide smile, with a gleam in his eyes. I didn't want to panic the students with the news of this intruder, so we hurriedly moved the students down the path, saying that it was getting too dark and we needed to return to camp. It wasn't long until we all picked up on the sounds of branches and leaves crunching and breaking behind us, a truly unnerving sound after what Simon had captured. We weren't sure who the person was or their intentions, but we knew they shouldn't be out here. Even worse, looking as deranged as he had, with his clothes torn, muddied, and the look in his eyes. Just on his looks alone, he was unnerving. We pushed the students a bit faster, with some of the younger ones panicking now, and the older ones nervously looking behind us as we all but ran down the path, making sure to keep an eye on everyone, not willing to let anyone stray. For a few nights after, we received word of break-ins with the camp, someone sneaking in and stealing supplies before leaving behind a dead bird or rodent in exchange. Our cameras did capture the man in question, and the police had been called multiple times before they eventually told us they couldn't find anyone after hours searching the woods, and it was probably, according to them, a homeless camper. One night in particular, we heard screaming from the woods behind Cabin 4, which had been at the farthest end of the camp. When the staff went to investigate, all we found was blood everywhere, and terrified children, with dead deer and doves plastered around the ground of the cabin. Many students went home after the incident, and unfortunately, the camp had to be closed down for safety's sake. Many parents demanded refunds, and the amount of press and negative lashback from the community kept the camp from opening again, and lawsuits ensured the camp owner never opened another one. I still have nightmares of that screaming, and the wild look in that man's eyes. I won't go back to that cabin. From Landman. I've got a rental property up in the mountains. This old run-down cabin, sitting on a few acres of dense forest. It's not the most popular of my rental properties, given the location and the general state of the place. But every now and then some city folks will rent it out for a rustic getaway. Well, a couple years back, I got a call from the latest guests. This young couple from the suburbs. They were in a total panic, saying there was something weird going on at the cabin, begging me to come check it out. I was thinking, great, probably just a busted pipe or a raccoon in the trash, but I agreed to drive up there and take a look. I got to the property, and right away I could tell something was off. The place was dead quiet, which is strange for those woods. Whenever I was out there, I had never not heard birds chirping and leaves rustling, those kinds of things. But this, it was just a total eerie silence. I go to knock on the door, but it swings wide open before I can even touch it. The couple is standing there, wide-eyed and shaking. Once they see me, they practically yank me inside. They then start babbling about hearing weird noises coming from the woods, seeing strange shadows moving between the trees, generally just saying very odd things. I'm trying to calm them down, telling them it's probably just wildlife, or their imaginations getting the better of them. But they weren't having it. They kept insisting that there was something out there, something watching the cabin. As anyone would, I think, I was starting to get a little bit freaked out myself. But I didn't want to show it. I told them I would go out to look around the property, to see if I could find anything out of place. I stepped out onto the back porch, and right away, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There's this weird, heavy feeling out there, like the whole forest is holding its breath. I had to basically force myself to walk out into the yard, shining my flashlight into the trees. That's when I see it. I'll describe it as best I can, but believe me, it's gonna sound a bit crazy. There was this pale, vaguely human-shaped thing, darting between the trunks, moving far too fast to be a person. I saw it for just a few seconds, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I freaking booked it back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. The couple was huddled on the couch, looking at me expectantly, but I didn't even know what to say. I wasn't even sure I believed what I just saw, but I knew that I didn't want to stay in that cabin a second longer than I had to. Long story short, I ended up giving the couple a full refund, putting them up in a motel for the rest of their trip too. I've never been able to bring myself to go back to the cabin at night, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. I'd rather pay someone to do that, if it came down to it. I've owned and worked with a lot of properties over the years. I've dealt with my share of weird crap, believe me. But that night, at the cabin in those woods, that was something else entirely. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe it was my own fear getting the better of me. But all I know is that there's something deeply, fundamentally wrong with that place. Don't think I'll ever know what it was I saw. Mrs. H's House, from Geeky. As a hospice nurse, I've seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things while caring for patients in their homes. But there was one patient from a few years back whose home gives me chills whenever I think about it. I was assigned to provide in-home care for this elderly woman. I'll call her Mrs. H. She was in the late stages of terminal cancer. Mrs. H was completely bedridden and required round-the-clock assistance. So I ended up spending a lot of time at her place. It was this big old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. Now, from the moment I stepped foot in that house, something felt off. It's hard to explain, but there was just this heavy, oppressive atmosphere that seemed to hang over everything. I tried to shake it off as just nerves or the natural sadness of the situation. But as the weeks went by, I couldn't deny that there was something genuinely eerie going on. It started with little things. Doors slamming shut on their own, objects inexplicably moving from where I'd left them, those sorts of things. I'd mention it to Mrs. H, trying to laugh it off as the house settling, or my own forgetfulness, but she would always give me this knowing look, saying, "It's not the house, dear. It's them." But I didn't press her on who they were at first, figuring it was just the ramblings of a sick, elderly woman. But the longer I spent in that house, the more I began to feel like we weren't alone there. I'd be sitting with Mrs. H, reading to her or adjusting her medication, and I would swear I could feel someone watching us from the darkened corners of the room. It all came to a head one night when I was staying over to monitor Mrs. H's condition. I had just helped her to bed, and I was settling in for a long night of paperwork and hourly check-ins. The house was quiet, save for the creaking of the old floorboards and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. Around 2 a.m., I was startled out of a half-doze by the sound of footsteps coming from the attic above Mrs. H's room. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. I sat frozen, straining my ears against the silence, but the noise had stopped as suddenly as it began. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, but then it happened again. The unmistakable sound of footfalls, this time accompanied by a low, mournful moan that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I leapt to my feet, heart pounding, and I rushed to check on Mrs. H. She was wide awake, her eyes wide and frightened in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. "Do you hear them?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're getting restless." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't very well tell my patient that yes, I was also hearing creepy noises in the night. I tried to soothe her, to tell her it was simply the wind or the old house making its sounds. But she grabbed my hand with a surprising amount of strength and fixed me with a piercing stare. "It's not the house," she said, her voice suddenly clear and steady. "It's the ones who died here, the ones who never left. They're angry I'm still holding on, that I haven't joined them yet." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. I knew some of the history of the house. It had been in Mrs. H's family for generations, and there had been more than a few untimely deaths here over the years. But to hear her speak about it so plainly, to claim that the spirits of the dead were lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to pass on, I didn't want to believe it. I've always been a rational person, someone who looks for logical explanations before jumping to supernatural conclusions. But the longer I sat there in the dimness of Mrs. H's room, listening to the eerie groans and thuds echoing from the empty spaces of the house, the harder it was to deny that something otherworldly was at work. From that night on, the strange occurrences only intensified. I'd find myself locked into rooms that I swore I'd left open, hear whispering voices and snatches of long-forgotten arguments drifting through the vents. And always the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes, of some dark presence stalking the halls and growing ever bolder as Mrs. H's health declined. In the end, she passed peacefully in her sleep, and I was by her side. And as much as it pains me to admit, a part of me was relieved. Not just for her sake, but for my own. Because in those final days when the veil between worlds seemed at its thinnest, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever inhabited that old house was growing impatient. After that, I told my supervisors I needed a break from hospice work for a while. The emotional toll had gotten to be too much. I haven't set foot in Mrs. H's house in years, but I still do think about it from time to time. reminding myself that whether I like it or not, there are things in this world we simply cannot explain. Sometimes we're just along for the ride. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, @DarkPrevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon. Alright, so bear with me here. For old time's sake, I want to take a break from the single stories this week and just do some various short stories people have been sending me. Don't worry, because the longer stories will be back next week. For now, buckle up for some ghosts of Gettysburg, werewolves in the Ozarks, and that thing that's been eating someone's cows. This is Unexplained Encounters. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, and send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. You can also find more scary stories narrated by me on my other show, Tales from the Break Room, also on your favorite podcast app. Now, let's begin. Warning: the following story contains depictions of violence against pets and animals. A werewolf ate my friend's dog. From Netherwolf. I am submitting this for a close friend who wants to remain anonymous. That being said, I've known him for a long time, and he's not the attention-seeking sort. He wrote this story down and asked me to submit it to the show. These are his words. My story takes place where I've hunted all my life. I won't give away the exact location because it's on private property, and I doubt the actual owner, who I've known since I was a kid, would appreciate that. What I will tell you is that it is a heavily forested stretch of about 200 acres in the foothills of the Ozarks. Near the northern edge of the property, the forest gives way to a large glade where whitetails often forage in the early mornings of the fall hunting season. That day I made my way down the gravel roads to the pull-off closest to the glade. Beside me, Brutus sat on the passenger seat, his huge blocky head lying lazily on the center console. Brutus was easily the best dog I ever had. I still don't know what breed he was. I found him at a rescue shelter a few weeks after I was discharged from the Marines. I knew the moment I saw him he was exactly what I needed to readjust to civilian life. I also knew from the size of his paws that he was going to be enormous, which was fine by me. I've never been too keen on little yappy dogs. I needed a man's dog, the kind who would be my ride or die, the kind who had my same warrior spirit. We bonded almost immediately. I wasn't wrong about Brutus being enormous either. By the time he was a year old, he stood nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, weighing almost 200 pounds. My best guess? He was either a Rottweiler or Mastiff of some kind, crossed with a Great Dane. His massive head almost more resembled a bear than a dog, and every inch of him was solid, lean muscle. His coat was short and dense, but his color was brindle, rather than the iconic black and brown of a Rottie. When we got to the pull-off, I retrieved my rifle from the cab of the truck, slinging it over my back. It was a Sigmauer M400, which my brother had given me for Christmas the year before. I'd taken it to the range a few times, enough to know how it behaved, but I hadn't had the opportunity to hunt with it yet. Honestly, apart from the selector switch, it wasn't that different from the M271 used overseas. I had 2 sights mounted on the rifle. A red dot sat on a 45-degree offset for close work. For longer shots, I ran a top-mounted mid-range optic with a night vision option. It wasn't highly magnified, but from where I planned to set up, it would do the job. I also brought my sidearm, a 9mm Glock 19. Obviously, I didn't plan to shoot a deer with it, but in Arkansas, concealed carry is easy, and I never go anywhere without it. The smell out there brought me back to my childhood. You know the smell if you spend any time outdoors? That earthy, slightly damp smell of earth and fallen leaves, and the faint, sweet scent of pine sap. That, combined with the smell of gasoline exhaust from the four-wheeler I'd brought on a trailer, was more appealing to me than any perfume or cologne. I prefer to hunt in the early morning, but that was a Sunday, and to me, worship is more important. By the time I got to my stand, it was about 90 minutes before sundown. It only gave me about an hour for deer, but I intended to be there well into the night. The same glade we have baited for deer is also frequented by coyotes in search of bedded down fawns, and coyotes are not something you want in an area you want to hunt deer in. In Arkansas, coyotes are considered a nuisance species, which means anyone with a license can get a permit to hunt them year-round with no bag limit. I dismounted the four-wheeler and unlocked the ladder guard. Brutus jumped down too, circling the tree looking for a place to leave his mark. He was such a good dog. The moment I called him and told him to stay, he laid himself at the base of the tree, his big ol' head over one paw, content to just be with me. The reason the stand had a ladder guard was because this particular stand was permanent. It was set on an ancient oak, the kind with big, gnarly roots shooting out in all directions, and so big around that 5 men could not wrap their arms around it at the base. It towered up over the smaller trees to give a perfect view of the glade. That ladder had been permanently secured to the massive trunk and climbed up about 40 feet to the stand that was fixed in the fork of the trunk and a branch twice as thick as my torso. The ladder guard was to make sure that, on the off chance someone else found our little honey hole, they wouldn't have access to the best vantage point. There wasn't even a whisper of a breeze, and as I sat there in the quiet, I was tempted to just close my eyes and sleep. If you're a hunter, you know, there's nothing more peaceful than sitting in a stand, listening to the orchestra of the forest, with no one else around to disturb you. I kept a watchful eye on the glade, scanning with my binoculars for any movement. Most of the time in the evening, deer are more cautious and will often wait just at the edge of a glade before eventually and slowly making their way in to graze. I didn't see anything for a while, apart from the random squirrel and one particularly fat raccoon. But then I noticed high above the glade 2 vultures circling as they often do over a kill. Before long, they swooped down and landed, feeding on what I could only assume was a carcass of some kind, which I could not see through the tall grass. I watched as the moon, which was nearly full, began to illuminate the otherwise pitch darkness. Before long, a thick, hazy fog began to gather over the ground. For several hours, everything was peaceful and still. Then I heard it. The hills erupted with the yowls and yips of coyotes. It echoed through the trees, and I thought it was likely only a few of them. To the untrained ear, it can sound like a lot more than that. I scanned the tree line beyond the glade, sure that at any moment, one of those murderous canines would come trotting out, following the scent of whatever carrion the vultures had left behind. The yipping faded away, and for a moment, the night was silent once again, until another sound came riding on the still air. This time, though, it was not the high-pitched communicatory calls of coyotes. It was a desperate yelping. It was the sound a canine makes when it is panicked or in pain. It rang out as if crying and pleading, and then was abruptly cut off. Every hair on my body began to stand on end from the top of my head all the way down to my feet. It was a familiar but unwanted sensation, one that I had not personally felt in years. It was an instinct born of bullets whizzing overhead and IEDs exploding in ditches. The sensation of mortal danger. And it was close. As if on cue, I heard Brutus, who had perked up and now stood facing the glade. His deep rumbling growl told me he felt it too. I looked down to where Brutus was standing like a statue, tall and menacing, and his hackle stood like a lion's mane around his back and shoulders. He was snarling, staring off through the trees at something I did not yet see. I shushed him. At first he ignored me, which was not like him at all. But when I snapped my fingers, he seemed to come back to himself. I shushed him again, and he lay down where he was, but not as if to sleep. That dog was alert, ready to jump into action at any moment. I brought my attention back to the binoculars, which had a night vision feature, and what I saw made my heart begin to race. This was no coyote loping out into the glade. It was far too big, even to be a wolf, even if we had wolves in Arkansas, which we don't. This thing was far bigger than even the largest of gray wolves, though the shape of its head, its pointed ears and long snout, its dark and shaggy fur, all seemed more wolf-like than wild dog. Were it not for its long, lanky limbs and graceful lope, I might have guessed it was a bear. There are plenty of black bear in the Ozarks. But whatever this was, its gait was far too smooth to be the lumbering shuffle of a bear. I watched as it approached the place where the vultures had fed. If there was any doubt in my mind that this thing was not a natural creature, all doubt was erased when it stood upright like a man and let out a howl unlike anything I'd ever heard before or since. At first it was like a wolf, a long drawn-out bay that raised in pitch. But it didn't stop there. It continued to get higher and higher until it sounded almost like a bull elk. It was then that I dropped the binoculars and picked up my rifle. Through the scope, I watched as the beast dropped back to the ground, not on all fours, but into a position similar to someone in a full squat. I watched it pick up something and raise it to its mouth with what I could clearly see were eerily human-like hands. I did not intend to shoot at it. I was desperately hoping it would get bored and wander off, back into the woods. Of course, that's not what happened. All at once, a gentle breeze began to blow against my back and down toward the creature. I stiffened when it snapped its head up, lifting its nose to the wind for a moment, then turned to look at me. I had no doubt that it saw me. It dropped whatever it was chewing, never looking away from me. It stood and turned and took a single step in my direction before I finally pulled the trigger. The shot was true. I know it was true. When you've hunted as many animals as I have, you know what a kill shot looks like. Its chest rippled slightly a split second before a fine spray of blood, bright and glowing in the thermal night vision, exploded from its back, and it dropped like a sack of grain. That's another way to know it's a kill shot. Ask any hunter and they'll tell you. There's no greater relief than when the animal they shoot immediately drops where it was standing, because it means they won't have to chase it down. I slid down the ladder, jumping on the ATV. I whistled at Brutus to jump on the back, and we took off to find out what the creature really was. It was even more terrifying up close. Illuminated by the headlights of the four-wheeler, it was clearer than ever that what I was looking at, and I still can't believe I'm writing this, was some kind of werewolf-like or dog-man or whatever other name you want to call it. I had just stepped off the vehicle when the thing moved. It was just a twitch at first, the kind of hypnic jerk that people have when they dream they're falling. Before I had time to bring my rifle around, it had rolled back to all fours and turned to face me. snarling and emitting a growl so loud and deep and resonant that I felt it reverberating in my chest. That's when I noticed its eyes. They were bright green, but they weren't like a dog's eyes. They were smarter, brighter, more intelligent. There was an awareness there that I've only ever seen in the eyes of another human being. What happened next only took a split second, but it seemed at the moment to unfold in slow motion. Its muscles tensed. It was getting ready to lunge at me. I let my rifle fall on its sling and held out my left hand out of instinct, preparing to brace the impact and give myself a little room to shoot as I reached for the Glock 19 holstered in my belt. I was too slow. It was in the air before my hand even reached the pistol grip. Its teeth were bared, its mouth was open, ready to tear into me. I was sure it was going to rip my arm clean off before I had a chance to shoot. But it never got to me. There was a blur in my peripheral vision, just as Brutus slammed into the creature's side hard enough to cause it to roll sideways. It was back on its feet in the blink of an eye, Brutus standing between us. Despite Brutus's massive size for a dog, he was still dwarfed by this creature. He lunged at it the same moment I pulled my Glock and leveled the sights over the monster's chest. I still see what happened next in my nightmares. The creature caught Brutus by the throat with one hand and chomped down hard on the back of his neck. It shook violently, and Brutus was then sent rolling away, yelping and crying. I emptied the entire 15-round capacity into the creature's chest. It stumbled back briefly, each impact causing it to twitch for a moment, but it never fell. I pulled the trigger until it clicked empty, and still it continued to come towards me. I've been shot at before. I've seen a Humvee blown apart by a roadside bomb right in front of me. I've had to take cover when enemy RPGs exploded around my position, but I have never been more afraid than I was in that moment. 15 9mm bullets should have been enough to kill just about anything, but it just kept coming. Its muscles tensed again, and I could tell it was about to charge. But just before it did, Brutus latched himself onto the back of the wolf's leg, pulling for all he was worth. It was just enough to pull it back to all fours, giving me a chance to bring up my rifle. I fired over and over until the magazine was empty, but I might as well have been shooting a ballistic dummy. It turned its attention back to Brutus, who was still pulling and thrashing his head side to side with everything he had. With a single swipe of its paw, it hit Brutus so hard that he had to let go. I had another magazine for my rifle in the rucksack that was secured to the front rack of the ATV. I ran for it as Brutus and that dogman werewolf thing circled each other, growling and snarling. I dropped the empty magazine and slammed the full one home, working the charging handle with practiced efficiency. I brought it up just in time to see the creature kill my dog. I won't go into great detail here. Honestly, it's too painful. Suffice it to say that Brutus was no longer in one piece, and there was nothing I could have done. In that moment, I had a choice. I could stay and shoot and hope that one of my bullets would put this thing down for good, or I could drive like hell for the stand and hope this thing could not climb. I chose the latter. I don't know if it could have caught me or not. It didn't try, at least not right away. I drove away throttle wide open, trying not to think about the fact it was eating my best friend. When I reached the stand, I climbed as fast as I could, only stopping to make sure the ladder gate closed as much as possible. Obviously, it wasn't designed to be locked from the top, but it was better than leaving it wide open. When I got back into the stand, I picked up my binoculars and followed the tire trail through the tall grass to where the creature was the last time I saw it. But it was not there. I scanned the glade again, but I could not see any movement other than the tall grass swaying in the gentle breeze. I smelled it before I saw it. That coppery metallic scent of blood registered in my nose only moments before the growling registered in my ears. I stood trying not to panic and scanned the base of the tree, or at least the side of it that I could see. The tree was so large and the stand was positioned in such a way I could only see a small section of it. It wasn't long before I saw the wolf-like creature again. It was circling the tree, clearly looking for a way to get to me. Once it saw me, it never looked away for very long. The way it assessed the tree was more than just animalistic. It seemed more intelligent than that. It looked from branch to branch as if estimating which branches could hold him and which could not, and whether or not the ones that looked strong enough were reachable. I thought for sure I was safe. This tree had lower branches, but the first one that was thick enough to bear the weight of a man was at least 14 or 15 feet off the ground. No man or wolf could jump that high. But I was wrong. With one motion, it leapt up the trunk, pushing halfway up with its hind paws digging into the bark, and landed on the sturdy branch. He was almost halfway to me already. I knew if I didn't do something, it would only be a matter of time before he figured out a way to get to me. I aimed down at it with my rifle, firing 3 rounds in quick succession. I know one of them hit, because it yipped, but in the darkness I couldn't tell where or how much damage had been done. It couldn't have been much, because the creature didn't even slow down. It leapt again. This time it overestimated how much the target branch could hold. It snapped under its weight, and it plummeted all the way to the ground with a thud. It took a moment to recover, then tried again. But this time I was ready. I waited until it was mid-jump and fired center mass. It was just enough to send it to the ground again. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. This creature was decidedly not insane. After the 3rd attempt, which I again thwarted with my rifle, it seemed to reconsider. It circled the tree until it found the ladder. It didn't take long for it to swing the gate open and start to climb. I could have fired at it again, but I knew I only had a handful of bullets left, that once those were gone, I'd be a sitting duck. I had to think quick. I remembered then, I had bear spray in the backpack I'd brought up the tree with me the first time. I know what you're thinking. Why would someone in Arkansas have bear spray? You have to understand, Marines are ingrained from day one with the importance of being ready for anything. The truth is, the last time I'd been to our local sporting goods store, they had one for sale, and I bought it, thinking you never know when you might need it. I pulled the pin and emptied the entire can, covering the wolf thing in the top part of the ladder in a yellow haze of pure capsaicin. It worked better than I could have hoped. It was nearly halfway up the ladder when the bear spray hit it full in the face. For the first time, I heard it truly yelp. It let go of the rails and pushed away with its legs to escape the cloud. It crashed to the ground, yelping and sneezing in that way only dogs do. I guess that was enough. It took only a few moments for it to regain its senses enough to run off into the night. I never saw it again. I sat back in the stand, my head resting against the rough bark. I reloaded my nearly empty magazine with shaking fingers, just in case it came back. But it didn't. Still, I didn't even try to make my way down until the light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon. In case you're wondering, I didn't leave Brutus there in the field. I took him home and gave what was left of him a proper burial. I still have his collar hanging on my rearview mirror. His leash is still where I left it, hanging on the hook by my front door. I don't think I'll ever be able to bring myself to get rid of it. Every time I look in the rearview, I'm reminded of the night I lost my best friend and the seemingly invincible creature who took him from me. I don't share this story to get sympathy, but rather as a warning. If you're going to be in the Ozarks at night, be prepared for anything. If you have a sidearm, bring it. If you don't have bear spray, get some and bring that too. You never know what you might run into. Now I know there is something in the Ozarks, and if you're not careful, you might end up on the menu. A Night in Gettysburg, from Silver Bullet 54. Anybody who's been to Gettysburg in Pennsylvania has realized if they were there on July 4th, 1863, they would be seeing red splotches everywhere around them, due to the longest single and deadliest multi-day battle in the Civil War. More than 51,000 men ended up killed, wounded, captured, or missing. There was even a civilian killed when a bullet went awry and hit a woman who was baking bread for soldiers, killing her instantly. Nowadays, the area is considered a hotbed for hauntings, as all those lives ended in a split second, and the ghosts either can't or won't move on. I went there on vacation once, and had 3 strange incidents happen. The first happened at the battlefield itself. I'm not sensitive to the paranormal, like some people might claim to be, but the entire time I was there, I kept feeling like I was being followed or even watched. Every time I looked around, anyone else there was either taking pictures or talking. No one even glanced in my direction. Eventually, I walked towards the Devil's Den and Little Round Top. The Devil's Den was an area of nothing but rocks and stones that had been covered with dead and dying soldiers, and Little Round Top was where the Union held off wave after wave of Confederate soldiers. That was what gave the Union their first major victory, spelling the beginning of the end for the South, as that battle started off a steady stream southward deep into the Confederacy. As I was looking around, I saw what looked like 5 people hiking up a small hill into a bunch of trees. I called out to them, but not a single one responded. A few moments later, I saw the same thing, 5 people going up the hill and into the trees. A moment later, it happened again. I now realized it was a residual haunting, likely Union soldiers marching up that hill over and over for eternity. This next one was the most terrifying. I was walking down 123 Carlisle Street, across from the Farnsworth House Inn. I happened to glance at it and saw a man staring at me with his teeth bared. I blinked to make sure it wasn't shadows or a reflection. He was still there, staring at me. I soon saw that he had on an expensive gray uniform and hat. I then remembered stories of an evil soldier haunting that inn. Allegedly, he had holed up there to hide, but when Union soldiers found out, they went all out to kill him. And to this day, all the bullet holes on the wall show that he didn't go down without a fight. People eventually decided to just not go into the inn unless there was a good reason to do so. They say that soldier gives off such feelings of anguish, doubt, and fear that even the bravest explorer can't go to the front door without being scared off. As I stared, his eyes followed me with every step. Eventually, the soldier vanished when the window was about out of sight. That made me stick to the other side of the street. The least scary thing was when I went into a nice and homey eatery. The Dobbin House Tavern, that's what it was called. The building was rumored to be haunted by the kind and friendly ghost of Reverend Andrew Dobbin, the original builder of the place. People say they can feel him sitting at their table as they eat, and one woman even claimed to hear him suggest the gingerbread. Can't confirm or deny, as I wasn't there at the time. As I sat, I did feel a few cold drafts, even though it was May, only around 5 p.m., and the temperature outside that day was close to 80. I also noticed that the candle was flickering a bit without any wind at all, which can happen with ghosts, according to what I've heard. After I'd eaten, I got up to leave and bumped into, well, nothing. I asked out loud for the wall to move and heard a small chuckle as I walked out. So is Gettysburg haunted? I give that question a resounding yes. I simply can't explain away what happened at the battlefield. Farnsworth Inn, too, or the tavern. I do plan to go to Gettysburg again. Who knows what will happen next? I at least hope it's really interesting. Some quick notes about the following story. First, be warned. It contains depictions of violence against pets and animals. Second, this is a good example of a fun story that is a terrible fit for unexplained encounters. For me, anyway, this goes beyond the realm of believability. I greatly appreciate the submission, but please label it as a creepypasta if it's clearly a work of fiction. Thank you. I watched my uncle's ranch while he was away. I'm never going back. From Kill M Artist. So, the past few days have been really stressful. My friend suggested that I should write about what happened to me and share it on this page, but I don't know how this is supposed to make me feel better. I guess in a way it could be a warning to others, but I highly doubt anyone would believe this anyway. It all started when I got a call from my uncle Shag last week. His real name was Chuck, but I've always called him Shag, on account of his shaggy beard ever since I was little. That's not important though. Anyway, his appendix had burst, and he had to go in for surgery to get it removed. He asked me if I could house sit for him, get some work done around his ranch while he was in the hospital. Stuff like feed his livestock, fix the fences, simple things that he would normally do himself. I told him I could, and asked if I could bring my dog Bear, since I had just adopted him, and I didn't have anyone to look after him while I was gone. He said I could, as long as he didn't bother the animals. Now, I had not been to my uncle's ranch in a few years. It was in a desert area in Utah, but I still knew how to get there, so I made sure to pack whatever I would need for a few days there, some movies since there was no Wi-Fi at the ranch, and a couple of snacks for me and dog food for Bear. It was going to be a 2-hour ride, and I had not yet eaten lunch, so I stopped by a fast food drive-thru, ordering myself a veggie patty, diet soda, and a small patty for Bear to eat. On the drive to the ranch, I noticed deer carcasses on the side of the road. At the time, I didn't give it a second thought. I supposed it wasn't too strange to find dead deer out here, but that many at once? I should have known better. A few minutes later, I would drive up to my uncle's ranch. I parked near the house that was farthest from the cattle, so they didn't get spooked and run away. As soon as I opened the door to let Bear out, he sprinted right to the cows. He barked and ran around a few of the cows wanting to play, but some walked away and others just ignored him. After about 2 minutes of trying to make new friends, Bear gave up and went to do his business, marking his territory. I smiled at Bear. I had a feeling he was going to have fun here. I turned my head to see a cow staring at me. The thing was thin. I mean, I could tell it had some meat on its bones, but also that it was becoming emaciated. I looked down to see that it must have been looking at the burger. I was holding it in my hand at the moment. "Whoa, it's a veggie patty, buddy. I'm on your side," I said, jokingly, as I raised it and pointed at it. Suddenly, I heard Bear yelp. I dropped my burger and ran towards him to see what was wrong. He had stepped on a broken piece of cactus. I quickly pulled out the thorns from his paw while he growled each time, but afterwards I was rewarded with licks to my face. I spent the rest of the day doing chores and working around the ranch. I won't bore you with the details of the work, but there was one peculiar thing that happened throughout the day. Bear kept growling at the anemic cow from a distance. He just wouldn't go near the thing. He would even grab my pant legs if I was heading in its direction. It was definitely strange, but I thought the cow was sick, and Bear didn't want either of us to catch whatever it had. Animals are funny like that. They can sense what humans can't. That should have tipped me off that something was wrong. By the time I got dinner ready for Bear and me, the sun was already setting. My uncle left me a note, telling me that his neighbor went grocery shopping before I came and left their number in case I needed them. Again, there was no Wi-Fi all the way out here, but there was a landline that I could use. "This is just like what the pioneers used back in the day," I joked to myself, knowing no one was around to laugh. I set Bear's bowl down and made my way to the living room. Uncle Shag didn't have cable, but he did have an old VHS player. As I set my food down on the living room table, I searched for something to watch. I ended up choosing Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein. When that was finished, I rewound the tape and chose Monty Python and the Holy Grail to watch next. I ended up falling asleep during the movie. I looked at the clock. 12:09, past midnight. I hadn't finished my dinner yet, but decided to just have the leftovers tomorrow. I got up and headed towards the guest room with Bear following me. I changed into a pair of boxers and got into bed. I fell right back to sleep as soon as I got in that bed. I could feel the weight of Bear as he jumped on the bed and lay his body on my legs, using my stomach as a pillow. The last thing I remembered before I gave myself up to the sweet relaxation of sleep was petting Bear's head. I was awakened with the sound of a high-pitched yelp. I quickly got up, and in the process I woke up Bear. No, that's not right. It was more like he was awakened by the same sound. I thought it came from him at first, but a few seconds later, we heard the yelp again. It was longer by a few seconds. Bear began to quietly growl as the yelp slowly went from high-pitched to a lower tone. I looked out the window to see if it was a coyote. One of the chores I had here was to set up bear traps around the perimeter so predators couldn't hurt the livestock. But I didn't see anything, nothing that suggested that there was something out there. I then left the guest room to see if I'd left the TV on before I'd headed to bed. And sure enough, I had. It was just static now, though. That yelping sound must have been coming from the movie before it ended and became static. I turned off the TV and made a mental note to rewind it in the morning. For the remainder of the night, there was no other disturbance. Bear calmed down as well. I checked the time before going back to sleep. It was 4:44 a.m. Morning arrived with the sound of a rooster making its iconic alarming sound. I got dressed and made breakfast for Bear and I, scrambled eggs with a side of orange juice and dog food. I stepped out to get started with chores, but was absolutely horrified by what I found. There were mutilated corpses outside of 3 of the cows. They were spread apart in front of the fences, blood from each body colliding into one giant pool, and swarms of flies hovering over the remains. It's hard to talk about the details, but I'll try to be as thorough as I can. Each cow had its stomach ripped open, entrails spilling out like stuffing from a worn-out toy that's been neglected over the years. The thing I noticed next was their throats. They'd all been slit, as if someone had been trying to keep them from making noise. I was sick. The first thing I see in the morning is cow mutilation. I took a few steps and threw up. I ran towards the livestock after that, praying this was the only set of casualties. Luckily it was. The rest of the cows had been huddled together in a sort of protection formation. You see, for some herbivores that have young or sick members in their herd, they form a sort of barrier surrounding them so that predators can't get through to them. I looked around to see if there were any footprints of what had been here, of what had done this. Bear came out of the house at that point. He followed me as I searched for clues, but we ended up finding nothing. No blood trail, no footprints. I looked over again at the herd. I saw that one thin cow from yesterday. It was standing in the same place. If it hadn't been moving its tail every few seconds, I would have thought it was a cardboard cutout. The only difference from yesterday was that its entire snout was missing. I saw something similar a while ago when I was watching this nature documentary about African wildlife. There was a zebra drinking water from a watering hole, when suddenly a crocodile ripped its face off. To my shock, the zebra was still alive, but almost its entire face was missing, leaving nothing more than a gaping hole of exposed skull a few centimeters under its eyes. I thought then how cruel nature can be sometimes, and what was in front of me must have been another example. I went over to approach the poor thing, but Bear once again stopped me. He had jumped in front of me and growled for me to go the other way. It wasn't an aggressive growl, but more like he was warning me of something. I lowered myself and began to rub his head. "It's okay, buddy. I've got to go get something to put that poor thing out of its misery. Then I'll get a shovel to bury the rest of the cattle over there," I told him, still completely confused myself, not knowing who or what had done this. I went back into the house to get my uncle's double-barreled shotgun. It was going to be a messy outcome for that cow, but a quick one at least. Just as I loaded the gun, I heard the sound of Bear snarling like a mad dog. I thought the culprit had come back to finish off the rest of the herd, so I ran out as fast as I could. I came back to Bear barking at nothing, like he just chose a direction and began to bark like a mad dog. I noticed that the snoutless cow was not there anymore. I assumed it had wandered off to die on its own. I felt bad. I was about to end its life quickly, so it wouldn't have to suffer any longer. Just then, I realized something. Did whatever do this come back for that other cow? Is that why Bear is acting like this? I thought to myself, as I looked in the direction Bear was barking at. I put the shotgun away, and I went to get a shovel and some bear traps, which my uncle had in the shed. I was disappointed to see there was only one left in the shed. I thought he had more, but one was better than none. When I came back, I put the bear trap aside, and I started digging graves for the cows, after which I would walk towards the tractor. Now, cows weigh a crap ton, and I had a better chance at marrying a model than pushing one bare-handed into a grave. Bear followed me and jumped into the seat next to me as I drove towards the bodies. The first two took effort to lift, but they were easy to move as I lowered them into the pre-dug graves. However, the last body was lifted without ease compared to the other two. I lowered it back to the ground, then climbed out of the tractor. I could hear Bear growl slowly as I went to inspect that corpse. I lowered myself and tried to lift the body. It was still heavy, but I could get it off the ground for a few seconds before giving in. I ended up dropping the body, making it topple to its side so it faced me. I was shocked when I saw it had no snout. I was sure that, of the attack, only the surviving cow had a snout missing, but that one was nowhere to be seen. Upon further inspection, there was a very large slit down the cow's body. I brushed my fingers against it and saw that the slit opened like a purse. I gagged as I saw that there were no organs inside the corpse, only bone and muscle. My first thoughts weren't, why did it have no organs, or what did this? The thing I wanted to know the most was, if this corpse was the snoutless cow, where did the other body go, and why was this one so heavy? I got a sudden chill and stood up to check my surroundings. The atmosphere felt off. Just then, I flinched as I felt a drop of rain fall on my forehead, followed by a few more as the sky began to grow dark and shower the land. I finished burying the last corpse. Then I took Bear inside with me. Whatever work I had for that day could wait till tomorrow. A few hours went by, but the rain did not let up. It was even starting to thunder, which I didn't mind as much. But Bear whined and hid in a corner. His personality compared to earlier was like someone had flipped a light switch in his brain. I fed both of us and was about to find a movie to watch when the power went out. The only source of light I had at the moment was my phone. However, my uncle is prepared for times like this. I took a few candles from his closet and lit a few around the house. After lighting a third candle, I looked at the rain through a window. I couldn't see much but darkness and the occasional flash of lightning. I heard Bear whimper more, and I rubbed his back, letting him know that I'm here before I put a blanket around him. After dinner, I put my plate in the sink, and I thought of going to bed early, since there was nothing else for me to do. As I undressed, I looked through the bedroom window. A flash of lightning showed there was a figure near the cow's fence. I did a double take, but I couldn't see anything for a few seconds, not until the next flash of lightning struck. When it did, the figure was already inside the fence, and that flash caught the moment that it raised its arm and slit a cow's throat. That's the cow killer, I thought, as I ran out of the house. A dumb idea to do during a storm, I know, but if I didn't catch this guy now, then I didn't know when I would. I grabbed the double-barreled shotgun and made my way to where I last saw the figure. The only thing I found was a pool of blood, with a trail leading away from the fence. The herd of cows within the fence mooed in fear as the adults surrounded the young. I followed the trail for a few minutes before I stopped. I heard some sort of noise like something wet and meaty being torn apart. I tried to listen to where the noise was coming from, but as the sound of thunder roared, it stopped. I held my breath. Suddenly, a flash of lightning struck and revealed the figure 20 meters away from us. It was hunched over one of the cows, eating it while it was still alive. Before the light faded, I could barely recognize its appearance. It was a cow with a slitted throat. It began to slowly rise like it knew how to stand up like a person. When the next flash of lightning struck, it threw itself backwards and began to spider walk further away. I gasped and turned around, making a beeline back to the house with only the flashes of lightning to guide my way. I couldn't hear if the thing was following me or not, but I wasn't going to risk looking back. The sound of Bear's barking guided my way to the house as I drew closer. I would leap through the door and slam it shut, locking both locks on the door. Just as I did, my legs finally gave in as I dropped to the floor, clutching the shotgun tightly against my wet, cold chest. I kept repeating, "What was that? What was that?" in my head for the next 2 minutes as I began to hyperventilate. When you see something your brain cannot comprehend, it tries to rationalize what it could logically be by filling in the gaps with what it already knows to try and make it make sense. However, there was nothing about what I just saw that made any sense. Bear's barking was replaced with a low growl as he headed towards me. He watched the door as I slowly calmed down. "It's okay, Bear. It's okay," I said to calm him down. But really, I was just trying to reassure myself. I noticed Bear was slowly moving his head towards the window from the door. Then he got up and began walking along the wall like he was prowling side by side with whatever was outside. He stopped moving then and raised his head quickly to the ceiling. At the same time, I felt the house shake a little with the sound of a large thud coming from the roof. Bear must have lost the thing's position because he spun around trying to see where it was. Things were silent for a few seconds. Even Bear was quiet. There weren't any sounds of footsteps on the roof. Nothing, unless you counted my heartbeat, which was quickening. I decided to get up, trying to hide in a room until this cow monster or whatever it was left. I didn't even take a second step when I heard a voice. It sounded like Abby something, I thought. Abby normal. It took me a few seconds, but then I realized it. It was a quote from Young Frankenstein, one of the movies I was watching last night. My blood went cold. Had it been right outside the house that night?
Jesus Christ!
It screamed, setting Bear off. He snarled and ran towards the bedroom. "Bear, wait!" I shouted as I followed after him. Bear rammed his head into the door, forcing it open, and he leapt towards the window. I stopped when I saw that the window was open and a mixture of what looked like hooved fingers reached inside the house. Bright yellow lights appeared in the darkness outside. The eyes of that thing. Bear leapt at the creature, forcing it to retreat as he went out the window with it and chased after it. "Bear, come back!" I shouted as I stuck my head out the window. I couldn't see where Bear was, but I could hear the sound of his barks, and another sound, a laugh. I didn't get any sleep that night. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I was so worried about Bear, and so scared of what that thing actually was. I prayed to God that Bear was okay and that he managed to drive off that thing. Morning came when the sound of a rooster crowed. I got dressed, arming myself with a hunting knife, my uncle's double-barreled shotgun, and left the house to search for Bear. I went to the side of the house where the bedroom window would be. I found muddy tracks belonging to Bear and another pair of tracks I assumed belonged to the creature. I followed these tracks for a good 5 miles, occasionally finding drops of blood mixed with mud, making me more concerned that I might not find Bear alive. After another half hour, I found something that I was not expecting. A pile of organs covered in mud and blood. The smell made me gag and tear up, and I was paranoid that they belonged to Bear. I then turned my head to see that there were more tracks. There's still hope, I thought. I followed the tracks for another 15 minutes, finding my way to the cow thing's corpse. I pulled out the hunting knife and stabbed it right in the head. I've seen too many scary movies and didn't want to risk a sneak attack. But sure enough, it seemed to be dead. I couldn't find any more footprints belonging to Bear, so I searched for another hour before I gave up. I couldn't find any more clues leading to Bear's whereabouts. I was so upset, so confused. It's almost like Bear just grew wings and disappeared. I wasn't in the mood to do anything all day. I know I had work to do, but I just couldn't do it. Bear was on my mind. I motivated myself to at least feed the livestock. After that, I just spent the rest of the time doing nothing. When dinner time came, I didn't eat. I made food for Bear just in case the smell attracted him back. As I opened the door, and I practically fell back and dropped the food, right in front of the house was Bear, sitting and staring at me. "Bear!" I shouted as I ran over to hug him. He felt off when I hugged him, though. It felt like I was hugging a bag of dried-up leaves. I pulled away and looked at him. Even his face seemed off. His pupils were so dilated that it almost looked like he had no irises at all. He wasn't panting, and now that I think of it, I don't think he was even breathing. "Bear?" I said. "Dinner's ready. You want to come eat?" As I walked inside, I kept the door open for Bear so he could get in. But he continued to sit there, staring at me, not making any movements at all. "What's wrong, Bear? Aren't you coming in?" I asked. Bear stayed where he was for another minute before coming inside at last. I picked up the food I'd dropped as he made his way towards the bedroom, and I soon followed after. When I entered the bedroom, Bear was sitting in front of the open window where he'd leapt out the night before. I closed it after putting his food bowl in front of him, and I went to make myself dinner. The rest of the night was uneventful. After eating, I went to bed early, but I woke up at 1:25 a.m. I had this feeling like I was being watched. I looked around but didn't see anyone there. The door was open, and I assumed that Bear went to sleep somewhere else. I shut my eyes and lowered myself back into bed so I could get comfy once more. My head hit the pillow, but then I opened my eyes by chance. I screamed. There was Bear on the ceiling. He was positioned like a spider waiting for its prey to get trapped in its web. I could see that his throat had been slit, the same way the cows had their throats slit. I realized then Bear did not kill the cow thing. It had killed him. And whatever had truly controlled that thing now controlled Bear. The bear thing must have seen the look of horror on my face, because it smiled in a way a dog could never smile. Too human. Suddenly, a pair of hands exited Bear's slitted throat as he leapt down from the ceiling. They tried to grab at my throat as Bear's mouth opened wide enough to bite my head. I took my pillow and smacked him with it, knocking him to the side of the bed as I ran out of the room. It wasn't long before Bear regained his footing and crawled along the walls to chase after me. The bear thing began to whine like it was hurt, but there's no way that pillow could have done damage. I tripped on a stack of movies and slammed my face into the wall. The bear thing jumped onto me, grabbing hold of my neck. Its mouth opened wider as the whine grew louder and more painful. I realized it wasn't forming the sound from its mouth. It sounded like it was playing a recording of it gutting Bear alive. It was making me listen to Bear's final moments on repeat. "What are you?" I shouted as I tried to loosen the hand's grip on my neck. The bear thing's mouth had shut around my head, digging its teeth into my head and chin. I was engulfed in the darkness of its mouth. Suddenly, I saw the same bright yellow lights from last night. The eyes were coming from inside the bear thing's mouth. They watched me as I struggled to free myself. I started to cry. I couldn't do anything else. The whining kept going, and it set me off. I rammed my head deeper into the bear thing's mouth, its teeth dragging against my skull, but it had also loosened its grip around my neck. I slammed my uncle's recliner on top of the monster, which gave me time to grab my car keys and run to my car. I had no time to grab my other things, or anything to defend myself with. I slammed the car door shut and locked it before starting the car. I was able to get away, despite a bruised throat and a few scratches. I looked in the rearview mirror to see something other than the bear thing. What I saw was an old naked woman. Her body was covered in a pattern of blood that looked like it was ritualistic. She was also wearing what looked to be a wolfskin over her body, covering her head, back, and arms. My stomach turned as I realized the wolfskin thing she was wearing was not wolf at all. It was Bear. She had skinned him and wore him like one of those Laplander animal hats. I was on the verge of a panic attack as I saw the woman get on all fours and slowly move and look more perfectly like my deceased dog. She ran opposite of me then. I lost sight of her after a minute, and just as I did, all my emotions came out. The tears in my eyes blocked my view of the road. I blacked out as I hit a large rock and crashed, nearly throwing myself out of my car. I woke up in a hospital bed. Apparently, my uncle had recovered enough from his surgery and was on his way home when he saw me in my wrecked car. I was asleep for 3 days. The whole time he stayed by my side until I woke up. Of course, he had all sorts of questions he wanted to ask. I thought about my answers carefully. I thought no one would believe my experience at the ranch, and about the woman that wore animal skins and became them. So I told my uncle that a wild cougar had attacked me at his home and had killed some of the livestock, and it had gotten my dog Bear. My uncle was saddened from the losses, but was just thankful I was alive. I stayed in the hospital for a few more days, my uncle never leaving my side. He drove me home after I recovered, but that would be the last time I saw him alive. I sit here writing about my experiences a few days after attending Uncle Shag's funeral. His ranch, you see, had caught fire, but I think he had been visited by the woman just like I had, and he had tried to defend himself. My heart is filled with nothing but guilt and regret. I keep thinking that I should have told the truth, even if it would have sounded insane. I mean, would you believe me? I wonder, though, when the woman visited him, did she go as Bear or some other animal whose skin she was wearing? I don't have any idea. I just wish I could see Uncle Shag and Bear to tell them I'm both sorry. Sorry that I didn't tell the whole story to my uncle, and sorry that I couldn't protect Bear. There's nothing more I can say. Just to whoever reads this, if you see a living animal with a slitted throat, run before it's too late. That was a nice change of pace. Some shorter stories to spice things up, and a werewolf in the Ozarks encounter to bat, just to remind me of the terrifying moments in my childhood. Perfect. Good night. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails, on Rumble as Darkness Prevails, or catch more scary stories narrated by me on my other show, Tales from the Break Room, airing every Tuesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.